According to classified U.S. Coast Guard maritime safety files, over 4,000 pieces of safety equipment aboard American cruise liners are inspected every single day. Lifeboats, fire suppression units, life jackets, rescue winches, and emergency rafts. The paperwork is meticulous. Every inspection log must match timestamps, signatures, and RFID stamps from certified engineers. These records are meant to ensure that when disaster strikes, there is no margin for error. But some records don't add up. In March of 2025, internal security reports from two separate Caribbean cruise ships flagged identical anomalies. Routine maintenance work being logged after hours, life raft harnesses and engine starters being calibrated perfectly. But no engineer was officially assigned those jobs. Surveillance footage revealed empty corridors and unopened storage rooms, yet maintenance tags were updated and equipment was left in flawless condition. At first, corporate security brushed it off as clerical errors. Then, a pattern emerged. The maintenance logs were being signed, physically signed, with the name of a senior maritime engineer who had been buried at sea 8 months earlier. Welcome to Voices from the Other Side. If you followed this channel, you already know we specialize in verified encounters from first responders, law enforcement, and maritime security professionals. These are not urban legends, not campfire stories. Every detail you're about to hear is drawn from official Coast Guard files and cruise line internal investigations that required federal subpoenas to release. Tonight, we take you into a world where engineering precision meets the impossible, where safety systems are kept in perfect working order by a man who shouldn't exist. And if you're new here, this is your invitation. Subscribe. Like and share this story with someone who thinks cruise ships are safe havens. Because after tonight, you may never look at a lifeboat the same way again. The story you're about to hear was first told by a veteran safety officer who agreed to speak under condition of anonymity. His testimony was cross-checked against internal ship records, U.S. Coast Guard investigations, and corporate emails that executives fought to keep buried. He worked with a man named Eddie Marsh, a mechanic with 22 years of maritime service, who was known for his tireless devotion to safety drills and maintenance checks. Eddie died suddenly of a heart attack in his cabin during a Mediterranean voyage and was given a maritime burial. His loss devastated the crew. 8 months later, Eddie's signature started appearing on maintenance logs again. If you're ready, settle in. The corridors of a cruise ship at 3 a.m. are eerily quiet. The hum of diesel engines reverberates through steel walls, and the gentle sway of the ocean hides secrets no passenger will ever know. This is where our story begins. Story 1, the Phantom Mechanic. The officer who came forward, we'll call him Mark to protect his identity, had been working maritime safety for nearly 15 years. By the time he signed on to the Celestia Voyager, a 600-passenger luxury liner, he was a seasoned veteran trained to catch every detail. A loose latch, a failing sensor, a hydraulic line that could jam during an evacuation drill. On a ship like this, he told investigators, a single overlooked malfunction can cost hundreds of lives. That's why we're obsessive. Mark worked closely with Eddie Marsh for 6 years. Eddie was the kind of man who lived in grease-stained coveralls, always carrying a battered metal clipboard filled with checklists. He was the first to volunteer for overtime, often doing surprise equipment checks at 2 a.m. He was old school, Mark recalled. didn't trust computers, said a pen and a signature were worth more than a QR code. When Eddie passed away suddenly in 2024, the entire crew gathered on deck for a maritime burial. His ashes were released into the Mediterranean under a blood-orange sunset, a final farewell to a man whose life had been spent ensuring others survived at sea. His cabin was sealed, his tools cataloged and redistributed, and his name etched on a brass plaque in the engine room, in memory of Edward Marsh, always ready. That should have been the end of his story. 8 months later, Mark was doing a routine inspection on Celestia Voyager. It was 3:30 a.m., a time when passengers were asleep and most crew were off duty. Mark scanned a life raft locker on Deck 9. According to their logs, that particular lifeboat had been serviced the night before, signed off by Edward Marsh. At first, he thought it was a cruel joke or clerical error. He even made a note to speak with the junior safety officer about unauthorized logbook entries. But when he opened the locker, every detail was perfect. Straps tightened to regulation, CO2 cylinders replaced, hinges freshly greased. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing, Mark said. And they worked like Eddie, even tied the safety knots the way he used to, left-handed with a double wrap. Over the next 2 weeks, it kept happening. Inspections that hadn't been assigned were completed. Expired fire extinguishers were replaced overnight without anyone seeing who did it. Life jackets were rearranged in Eddie's signature style, each buckle tucked neatly beneath the vest, straps coiled like clockwork. When Mark finally confronted his team, every single engineer swore they hadn't touched those stations. They thought Mark was playing a prank. He wasn't laughing. Security began pulling CCTV footage. What they found chilled the entire safety department. Empty hallways, no sign of activity. Yet the timestamps matched Eddie's old working patterns exactly. Cameras showed doors opening on their own, tools moving across benches, and clipboards being lifted by invisible hands. That's when corporate security stepped in and tried to bury the story. Mark knew cruise lines had a reputation to protect. A story about a dead engineer haunting the ship's lifeboats would spark media frenzy, panic passengers, and tank ticket sales. But this wasn't just a ghost story. It was a safety issue, Mark told investigators later. If unauthorized people were working on emergency equipment, we had a breach. So he did what he'd been trained to do: document everything. Every strange repair, every clipboard entry, every maintenance log signed E. Marsh. He took high-resolution photos of the equipment, noting Eddie's distinctive handwriting and initials. I recognized his capital M, Mark said. He had this flourish at the end like a wave. Mark's supervisor, Chief Safety Officer Daniels, wasn't amused. He told me to stop digging, Mark recalled. We don't spook guests with ghost stories, he said. Someone's having fun at your expense. Drop it. But Mark couldn't drop it. The work was too meticulous, too professional to be a prank. And it wasn't just lifeboats anymore. One night, Mark checked a fire hose station and found the nozzle replaced with a brand new unit. Inventory records showed no one had signed it out. Another time, a lifebuoy light sensor was swapped for a newer model the ship hadn't even stocked yet. We were getting equipment that wasn't on our manifests, Mark said. I asked logistics where it came from. They said they hadn't received those models yet. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. He turned to the surveillance team for help. Together, they combed through hours of CCTV footage, starting with the night of March 18th, the first mysterious repair. At 2:41 a.m., a maintenance closet door swung open on deck 7. The security feed showed no one there. Inside, a red toolbox levitated slightly off the floor, then slid across the room as if carried by invisible hands. Tools clinked softly, screwdrivers twisting in the air before the door closed again. The footage was forwarded to corporate security. Within 24 hours, Mark was summoned to a private conference room, where a suited man introduced himself only as Mr. Harris, a consultant for maritime risk assessment. Harris confiscated Mark's laptop, his flash drives, and every copy of the footage. "They told me I'd breached company policy by spreading misinformation," Mark said. "They made me sign an NDA and told me the matter was closed." But the repairs continued. Passengers began reporting unusual things too. A couple on deck 11 swore they'd seen a man in blue overalls walking the promenade at dawn, clipboard in hand, before vanishing into thin air. Another guest captured a blurry photo of a figure crouched by a lifeboat, face obscured but posture unmistakably human. The timestamp was exactly 3:17 a.m., Eddie's favorite inspection hour. Mark realized something chilling. The safest ship at sea was being maintained by a man who'd been dead for nearly a year, and the company was more afraid of bad press than the truth. 2 weeks after corporate seized Mark's footage, he was summoned to meet a federal inspector on board while the Celestia Voyager was docked in San Juan. The man introduced himself as Special Agent Cole from the Coast Guard's Office of Maritime Safety. He didn't waste time on small talk. "We've had similar reports from 3 other ships in the fleet," Cole said, flipping through a folder thick with photographs and maintenance records. "Same name, same signature, Edward Marsh." Mark felt vindicated and terrified. Cole's photos showed lifeboat harnesses tightened with Eddie's signature double wrap, extinguisher seals tied in his meticulous style, even tool marks that matched Eddie's personal wrench set, which had been sealed after his burial. The agent leaned in. "We need you to take us where it started." That night, with most passengers ashore for an overnight excursion, Mark led Cole and 2 technicians through the quiet lower decks. The ship creaked softly in the tropical heat, fluorescent lights buzzing above polished steel corridors. "Every time," Mark whispered, "it starts here. Deck 7, starboard maintenance closet." They set up thermal cameras and electromagnetic field scanners. At 3:12 a.m., the temperature in the hallway dropped 10 degrees. The EMF meter spiked violently. A screwdriver clattered to the floor inside the locked closet. Cole motioned for silence. The technicians slowly opened the door. Inside, tools floated inches above a workbench. One by one, they arranged themselves neatly, as if an invisible mechanic were preparing for an inspection. Then a clipboard lifted off the table and hovered midair. Slowly, with mechanical precision, a pen began scratching across the inspection sheet. Mark's heart pounded. He could see the handwriting forming, E. Marsh. Then came the sound, boots on steel. Soft, deliberate footsteps echoed from the boiler room below. The team followed, cameras rolling, every instinct screaming to turn back. They descended a narrow stairwell to deck 1, where heat radiated from massive engines thrumming like a heartbeat. In the flicker of emergency lights, a figure stood at the far end of the boiler room. A stocky man in blue overalls, head down, grease on his hands. "Eddie Marsh, sir," Cole called out. The figure didn't respond. He simply crouched, tightening a hydraulic valve. When he looked up, his face was pale, almost translucent under the harsh lighting. Eddie's eyes met Mark's for a moment, calm, focused, as if he were on duty. Then he turned, walked straight through a sealed bulkhead door and vanished. The room went dead silent. Cole muttered, "We've got enough," and ordered his team to secure every recording device. By dawn, the entire incident was classified. Cole and his technicians left the ship by helicopter, taking all evidence with them. Mark was told to forget what he'd seen, but he couldn't, because Eddie wasn't just appearing, he was working, and his work was saving lives. 3 days after the boiler room encounter, Mark was abruptly reassigned to daytime inspections. The company cited crew rotation protocols, but he knew better. He wasn't supposed to be on those decks at night anymore. Every time he asked about the investigation, his supervisor shut him down with clipped answers. "Handled at corporate level. Focus on your duties." But rumors spread quickly among the crew. Whispers circulated about mysterious repairs completed before inspection deadlines, parts appearing in storage that no one had ordered, and lifeboats prepped hours ahead of scheduled drills. "Somebody down there loves this ship," joked a junior mechanic. Mark forced a smile, but inside he felt a chill. He'd seen Eddie's face, calm, determined, almost human in its focus. It wasn't a haunting in the traditional sense. Eddie wasn't rattling chains or scaring passengers. He was working. Then came the near disaster. On April 9th, the Celestia Voyager was sailing through heavy weather off the coast of Bermuda when a critical hydraulic pump in Lifeboat Station 5 failed mid-storm. The alarm triggered a cascade of safety alerts, and Mark rushed to the station with his team. The pump, a vital component for lowering the lifeboat, was jammed solid, but when they arrived, it was already fixed. "I remember standing there in disbelief," Mark later told federal investigators. The pump casing was spotless, greased, and operating better than it had in months. There was a maintenance tag attached to it, signed in black ink, E. Marsh. The crew swore no one had been assigned to Station 5 that night. Security footage showed the alarm going off at 2:07 a.m., followed by several minutes of scrambled activity in nearby corridors. But the camera feed for Lifeboat Station 5 glitched, freezing on a single frame. The silhouette of a man crouched by the pump, his face obscured by shadow. Corporate tried to chalk it up to corrupted data, but Coast Guard specialists weren't convinced. They quietly ran diagnostics on the footage, confirming the glitch lasted exactly 3 minutes and 22 seconds, the same amount of time it would take Eddie to replace that pump. Within hours, an encrypted message circulated among maritime security officials. Subject Marsh anomaly. Confirmed equipment restoration beyond scheduled maintenance. Evidence sealed under Class 3 security protocols. Mark knew what that meant. Eddie was no longer a rumor or a ghost story whispered in crew quarters. He was an officially classified phenomenon. For weeks afterward, Mark noticed a strange calm settle over the crew, even in rough seas, even when equipment malfunctioned. Someone always found things fixed before disaster struck. It was as if Eddie's ghost had become part of the safety team, a silent engineer patrolling the decks, working graveyard shifts no one else could cover. Passengers remained blissfully unaware, but Mark had started leaving an extra set of tools out in the maintenance closet each night. "If he's going to work," Mark said, "the least we can do is make sure he has what he needs." By the end of that season, Mark had stopped questioning Eddie's presence. He'd seen enough. Doors unlocking on their own, tools arranged with Eddie's signature precision. inspection logs appearing in neat handwriting nobody dared forge. It felt like he just never clocked out, Mark admitted in his debrief. The ship's higher-ups, however, were in full damage control mode. Engineers were told not to discuss the anomaly, and surveillance teams were instructed to delete footage that couldn't be explained. Passengers were never informed, but whispers spread across the fleet. Crew members on other ships started sharing similar stories. Lifeboats serviced with Eddie's style of knots, spare parts materializing in locked cabinets, inspection reports signed with his initials. Then came the most unsettling evidence of all. Late one night, Mark returned to the boiler room, driven by curiosity he couldn't shake. He carried a small voice recorder, tucked discreetly in his jacket pocket. The engines thundered like a living beast, but beneath the hum he heard something else. A low, rhythmic clanking of tools, the creak of a wrench tightening bolts. He followed the sound, heart hammering, until he reached a shadowy corner near the auxiliary pumps. "Eddie," Mark whispered, feeling ridiculous speaking into the empty air. The clanking stopped. Then faintly through the din of the engines came a voice, calm, steady, familiar. "Not done yet, kid." Mark froze. He turned slowly, but no one was there. The smell of machine oil hung heavy, and on the workbench lay a clipboard with Eddie's neat handwriting. Hydraulics secured, life rafts inspected, pumps operational. Mark left the boiler room trembling, clutching the clipboard. That was the last time he went down there alone. A week later, federal investigators boarded the Celestia Voyager at night under tight security. They removed boxes of evidence, maintenance logs, security footage, even that clipboard. Mark was called into a sealed room and told that what he'd seen and heard was classified under maritime security laws. This conversation never happened. One agent warned him. Mark transferred to shore duty shortly after. He couldn't shake the image of Eddie's calm, grease-stained face in the boiler room, or the voice that sounded as solid and alive as the man himself. "I don't know if he's a ghost," Mark later said. "All I know is Eddie Marsh is still doing his job, and that ship is safer because of him." Corporate officially attributes Eddie's work to data inconsistencies and procedural overlap. But Mark keeps a small token, a steel wrench engraved with Eddie's initials, as proof that some safety measures defy explanation. And if you ever find yourself aboard a Caribbean cruise ship at 3 in the morning, walking past the lifeboat stations, take a moment to look closely. You might notice freshly greased hinges, perfectly coiled ropes, and inspection tags signed with a steady hand. This is voices from the other side, bringing you stories they tried to bury. If Eddie's story sent a chill down your spine, subscribe, share, and drop a comment, because next week, we're diving even deeper into maritime security files that reveal more than just ghosts. Some heroes don't quit, even after death. Story 2, Deck 9 at Midnight. On modern cruise ships, decks are mapped down to the millimeter. Passenger hallways, staff-only corridors, hidden storage rooms, every single square foot is accounted for in engineering schematics approved by international maritime safety boards. No deck is ever forgotten. So when the MS Oceanese Grace, a 900-passenger luxury vessel, reported a series of missing persons cases all tied to Deck 9, investigators assumed it was a misunderstanding. There was no Deck 9. According to the ship's official blueprint, passenger accommodations jumped from Deck 8 to Deck 10, a marketing trick many cruise lines use to skip the unlucky number. Passengers slept soundly, believing their vacation palace was safe, meticulously mapped and secure. But security footage told another story. The first incident occurred in July of 2025, when a couple from Chicago, Sarah and Matthew Green, were captured on CCTV walking toward a service stairwell just after midnight. Sarah was laughing, holding a cocktail, while Matthew filmed her with his phone. They climbed the stairs and never came back down. Shipwide searches, PA announcements, and a 48-hour Coast Guard investigation turned up nothing. Authorities combed through camera feeds frame by frame. At 12:07 a.m., Sarah and Matthew were seen stepping through a door marked Deck 9 in bold white letters. Problem was, that door didn't exist when investigators inspected the stairwell. In its place was a blank steel wall, sealed and unbroken. For weeks, the cruise line buried the incident under unsolved disappearance at sea. But then it happened again. A teenage boy named Kyle Dawson vanished under identical circumstances. His last known footage showed him holding a bag of snacks, earbuds in, walking toward the same stairwell at exactly 12:01 a.m. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to someone speaking just out of range. He opened the Deck 9 door and stepped through. Gone. The Oceane's Grace became a floating rumor mill. Crew whispered about the phantom deck. Guests nervously avoided Deck 8 aft stairwell. Some passengers swore they heard footsteps overhead at night, heavy, deliberate, pacing back and forth above their cabins. Others claimed they'd seen faint light seeping through the seams of the wall where the Deck 9 door had once been. That's when voices from the other side got involved. If this is your first time here, welcome. This channel brings you verified accounts that cruise companies, airlines, and even federal agencies fight to keep hidden. These aren't ghost stories designed for clicks. These are investigations sealed by court orders, FOIA requests, and classified maritime records. Tonight's story is about a deck that isn't supposed to exist, a floor of a luxury ship scrubbed from every blueprint but alive on surveillance footage. If you want to keep this investigation alive, hit like, share this with someone who loves cruises, and subscribe. Because after tonight, you'll never look at a stairwell sign the same way again. The man who first broke silence about the Deck 9 incidents was Chief Security Officer Anthony "Tony" Alvarez, a veteran with 18 years of maritime law enforcement experience. Tony had served on 3 different fleets before being assigned to the Oceane's Grace, a ship he described as a floating city with 14 decks, 800 crew, and more cameras than some casinos. Tony took pride in precision. He knew every stairwell, every blind spot, every door, even the hidden service corridors that passengers weren't supposed to see. If there was a Deck 9, I'd have known about it, he told investigators. I'd walked those stairs hundreds of times. That door wasn't there. After the Greens' disappearance, Tony was ordered to oversee a top-to-bottom review of the ship's blueprints. Engineers swore up and down that Deck 9 didn't exist. The ship's schematics, approved by the International Maritime Organization, showed nothing but structural bulkheads and empty ballast compartments between Deck 8 and Deck 10. If there was a hidden deck, it would have thrown off the ship's balance. One engineer argued, "It's impossible." But Tony wasn't convinced. He started working the midnight shift, patrolling the aft stairwell on Deck 8 where the couple had vanished. "That area gave me chills," he admitted. "Even when it was empty, I felt like someone was watching me from above." The second disappearance, Kyle Dawson, escalated his unease into full-blown fear. When Tony reviewed the footage, his heart sank. "You can see him clear as day," Tony said. "He's got his earbuds in, carrying chips and soda. He walks up, looks to his right, and there's this glow, like the lights leaking out around the edges of a door. He opens it, walks through, gone." Tony and his team rushed to the stairwell less than 10 minutes later. No glow, no door, just cold steel welded seamlessly where Kyle had stepped through. They used thermal scanners, structural radar, even tapped on the wall with crowbars. Nothing but hollow echoes. The ship's captain, fearing panic among passengers, filed the incident as an overboard accident, claiming Kyle had fallen into the sea, but Tony knew better. "There's no way," he said. "We had motion sensors on the deck, cameras on every railing. Kyle never made it topside." Crew members began whispering about hearing footsteps coming from inside that wall. One housekeeper reported seeing a shadow pacing behind her in the stairwell mirror, a shadow that didn't match anyone nearby. Tony began documenting everything himself: audio recordings, floor plans, timestamps, and thermal images. He kept copies off the ship's network, fearing corporate deletion. He had one goal: to catch the door on camera while it was open. Then, one rainy night, he got his chance. It was 12:03 a.m. The corridor lights flickered and the door was there. The footage from that night is sealed under Maritime security protocols, but Tony remembers every detail. "It was raining hard," he recalled in a sworn statement. "You could feel the vibration of the engines and the storm slamming against the hull. I was alone, walking my usual patrol route. At 12:03 a.m., I turned the corner and there it was. The door stood where a seamless wall had been earlier that day, its paint a slightly darker shade than the surrounding steel. A small placard read Deck 9 restricted access in crisp block lettering. A narrow strip of yellow light spilled out from underneath. Tony froze, heart pounding in his chest. I'd walked that stairwell 100 times. It wasn't there before. I know every weld on that wall." He reached for his radio to call backup, and it died. The screen blinked and powered off. His flashlight sputtered and went dark. The hallway lights dimmed, flickering like a dying candle. Tony's instincts screamed at him to leave, but his training overrode his fear. He placed a gloved hand on the cold steel handle. The metal was freezing, as if it had been sitting in a freezer for hours. He gave it a cautious push. The door swung open silently. On the other side was a corridor unlike anything on the Oceanie's Grace. The lighting was dim and yellowed, flickering intermittently. The walls were lined with brass fixtures and peeling wallpaper, as if ripped straight out of a 1950s ocean liner. There were no signs of modern safety equipment. No cameras, no exit signs, not even fire extinguishers. Just a long, narrow hallway that seemed to stretch far beyond the physical boundaries of the ship. A soft hum filled the air, low and resonant, vibrating in his bones. Somewhere in the distance, Tony thought he heard music, faint, tinny, like an old gramophone playing a forgotten waltz. He took one cautious step inside, and the temperature plummeted. His breath fogged in front of his face. He moved another step forward, boots echoing unnaturally loud on the polished floor. That's when he saw them. Down the hallway, perhaps 50 feet away, a woman in a red dress stood with her back to him. Her hair was perfectly styled in a vintage updo, her posture rigid. She wasn't moving. Next to her, a man in a cream-colored suit leaned casually against the wall, staring at the ceiling. Both figures were motionless, eerily still, as if frozen in time. Tony's hand instinctively went to the flashlight strapped to his vest, but it wouldn't turn on. He tried to speak. "Security, identify yourself." His voice echoed down the corridor unnaturally, as though he were shouting into an empty cathedral. Neither figure reacted. Then, slowly, both turned their heads toward him in perfect unison. The two figures stared at Tony with lifeless expressions. Their faces were pale and smooth, as if sculpted from wax, their eyes glassy and distant. He gripped his radio instinctively, though he knew it was dead. The corridor felt wrong. The ship vibrated differently here, and the low hum beneath his feet was out of sync with the engines he knew so well. "They didn't blink," Tony said later, voice shaking. "They just stood there, side by side, watching me, like they'd been waiting for me." He considered retreating, but his legs moved forward on their own, driven by a mix of fear and duty. Each step echoed unnaturally loud, the metallic clank reverberating like he was walking in an empty warehouse. The hallway stretched farther than the ship's dimensions should allow, with doors evenly spaced on either side, each marked with faded brass numbers: 901, 902, 903. Tony reached for the nearest handle. The doorknob was ice cold. He cracked it open and peeked inside. The cabin was immaculate but outdated: floral wallpaper, a rotary phone on a desk, a small porthole looking out to a calm ocean under moonlight, though the oceany's grace was currently in the middle of a storm. A woman's straw sun hat hung on the wall, untouched by dust. The bed was neatly made, as if awaiting a guest who'd never arrived. He shut the door quickly and turned back to the hallway. The two figures were gone. The distant gramophone music grew louder, a lilting waltz with a haunting melody. He followed the sound down the corridor, his breath fogging with every step. The numbers on the doors kept climbing: 920, 921, 922. The hallway seemed endless, bending slightly, curving in a way that didn't match the ship's design. Suddenly, a door on his right creaked open on its own. Tony raised his dead flashlight like a weapon and stepped closer. Inside was another cabin, but this one wasn't pristine. The furniture was smashed, the wallpaper shredded. The bed was overturned and dark stains covered the floorboards. The porthole was shattered, revealing a churning black sea beneath a full moon. As Tony stepped closer, he noticed something chilling. The broken glass was wet. Ocean water dripped onto the floor, pooling around his boots. A whisper broke the silence. "You shouldn't be here." Tony spun around, but the hallway was empty. The door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang, nearly crushing his hand. He yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Then the gramophone music stopped. The silence was suffocating. Tony backed away slowly, heart pounding, and that's when he saw them again, the woman in red and the man in white. They were closer this time, standing just 10 feet away. Both smiled faintly, their faces stretching in unnatural symmetry. And in that smile, Tony finally understood. Deck 9 wasn't just hidden, it was hungry. Tony's instincts screamed at him to run. He took a step back, gripping his useless radio like a lifeline. The woman in red tilted her head, that eerie smile fixed in place. The man in white straightened his posture, eyes dark and hollow. Then, as if choreographed, they both stepped forward, slow, deliberate, silent. Tony spun on his heel and bolted. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, doors flashing past as he sprinted, his boots slamming against the steel floor. He passed cabin numbers that shouldn't exist: 950, 951, 975, 1001. The corridor bent at impossible angles, twisting and curving like a labyrinth. The low hum beneath his feet turned into a pulse, a rhythmic thump like a heartbeat coming from deep inside the ship's bones. He spotted a stairwell sign ahead, a glowing red exit marker above a door. Relief surged through him. He grabbed the handle and yanked it open, only to find himself staring into another identical hallway lined with brass fixtures and numbered doors. The door slammed shut behind him, and when he turned, the sign was gone. "Where's deck 8?" he whispered to himself, panic rising. Somewhere behind him, a new sound emerged, slow footsteps echoing in perfect rhythm, getting closer. Tony turned and saw them again. The man and woman, now joined by a third figure, a child clutching a worn teddy bear. Their faces were blank, but their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the flickering lights. Tony tried another door. Locked. Another. Locked. He reached a third, and it swung open into a pitch-black stairwell. He didn't think, he just ran. The stairs spiraled downward, far longer than the ship's height should allow. His breath came in ragged gasps as the temperature plummeted, his fingers numbing against the icy railings. Suddenly, a voice echoed from below, "Deck 9, all aboard." The sound was distorted, like an old intercom announcement playing on a broken loop. Tony froze mid-step. The voice repeated, slower this time, "Deck 9." Something moved in the shadows beneath him, a flicker of pale light. The air smelled like seawater and rust. He bolted back up the stairs, his boots slipping on the metal steps. The lights above flickered violently, and the hum of the ship's engines warped into an otherworldly groan, as if the entire vessel was alive and watching him. When he reached the top of the stairwell, the door he'd entered through was gone. In its place was another endless hallway. His chest tightened, his vision blurred, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades at sea, Tony felt true terror. "Keep calm," he muttered to himself, voice shaking. "Find the cameras, find the stairwell." But deep down, he knew there were no cameras here, no safety nets, no way back. Deck 9 wasn't a place, it was a trap. And it was rearranging itself around him. Tony's pulse hammered in his ears as he staggered down the endless corridor, every instinct screaming that something was closing in. The lights flickered overhead, casting the hallway in sharp bursts of shadow. Each time the lights blinked off, the figures were closer, the woman in red, the man in white, the child with the teddy bear, all standing perfectly still, smiles frozen, eyes reflecting the faint glow like mirrors. "Get me out of here," Tony muttered, breath ragged. He ran his hands along the cold walls, desperate for anything that felt familiar. And then beneath his palm, he felt something odd, a seam, like a hidden hatch. He shoved his shoulder against it, and to his shock, the panel gave way, swinging open into a maintenance shaft. Without thinking, he dove through. The shaft was narrow, lined with tangled pipes and humming conduits. The air was warmer, carrying the familiar smell of engine grease. He crawled on his hands and knees, hearing muffled whispers behind him. The voices weren't human, they were distorted, echoing in multiple tones at once, repeating his name. "Anthony Alvarez, come back." The words reverberated through the pipes, chasing him as he scrambled forward. Finally, he saw a faint light ahead, an access grate leading into another hallway. He kicked it open, tumbled out, and froze. He was back on deck 8. The hallway was bright, modern, lined with security cameras and safety signs. His radio crackled to life, startling him. "Alvarez, report. Where the hell have you been?" A voice barked. Tony looked back at the maintenance hatch he'd crawled through, but it was gone. Nothing but smooth steel, no seam, no panel, no sign of a door. He touched the wall, heart racing. It was as if Deck 9 had erased its own entrance. Security officers arrived minutes later, weapons drawn, scanning the area. Tony could only mutter, "It was there. A door. A hallway. People, they were waiting for me." His colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, but when they pulled footage from the hallway cameras, the recording showed nothing but static for over 20 minutes, the same 20 minutes Tony had been gone. Weeks later, while reviewing archived ship schematics, Tony found something chilling, an early blueprint of the Oceanese Grace, dated before its final refitting. There had been a Deck 9 once, decades ago, a luxury floor converted into ballast space after a tragic fire killed 30 passengers. The deck was welded shut, stripped from marketing materials and erased from public records. But somehow, it was still there. Tony resigned 2 months later. He never returned to sea. In a private interview, he warned investigators, "It's not a ghost story, it's a doorway. That deck is still alive and it wants people." Cruise line officials denied everything, blaming stress and fatigue. The case was sealed, but passengers continue to vanish aboard other ships in the same fleet, always near unmarked stairwells. And if you ever hear music behind a blank wall at midnight, don't open the door. This is voices from the other side. If this story chilled you, hit like, share, and subscribe, because next time we'll bring you more classified horror from inside the very vessels meant to keep us safe. Deck 9 isn't the only place passengers never come back from. Story 3, The Ghost Manifest. In the digital age, cruise ships are marvels of surveillance. Every passenger is scanned, photographed, and logged before stepping foot on deck. Facial recognition software tracks movement, RFID wristbands record purchases, and keycard access logs every cabin door entry. On a modern liner, nobody is invisible, which is why the incidents aboard the Caribbean Meridian shook even the most seasoned maritime security investigators. In August 2025, security officers began receiving multiple reports from staff. Families of passengers were showing up at restaurants, pool decks, and kids' clubs, yet none of them existed in the ship's booking database. One case stood out. On the second night of the voyage, servers at the upscale Sapphire Dining Hall reported a pleasant family of 4. A man in his 40s, his wife, and 2 children, a boy and a girl around ages 10 and 8. They enjoyed a full-course dinner, tipped generously, and chatted with staff about the ship's amenities. The next morning, when housekeeping attempted to clean their stateroom, they couldn't find them. The cabin number they'd given didn't exist. Even stranger, surveillance footage from that night confirmed their presence. Clear, high-definition video showed the family walking into the dining hall, sitting at their assigned table, and leaving hand in hand. But when investigators pulled their facial recognition profiles, the system flagged no match. Their wristbands and keycards were blank, reading as unregistered device. The cruise line initially blamed a technical error, but as more sightings came in, that excuse fell apart. Crew members reported seeing the same family in multiple locations at once. A bartender swore he served them smoothies at the pool bar at the exact time a waiter said they were eating dinner. Kids club counselors remembered their names, Emily and Daniel, but no booking file contained those names. Ship engineers double-checked manifests, and every cabin was accounted for. The mysterious family had no registered room, no booking confirmation, no payment method, nothing. That's when voices from the other side began digging. This channel specializes in classified maritime investigations, stories scrubbed from official reports and sealed under corporate and federal security protocols. What you're about to hear has been verified through staff interviews, leaked footage, and internal incident reports. Cruise companies don't want you to know about phantom passengers, but they exist, and some, it seems, never left the ship at all. If you're new here, subscribe now, like this video, and share it with someone planning a cruise vacation. Because when you board a ship, every smiling face you see isn't necessarily alive or even real. The story begins with Chief Security Officer Linda Hayes, a woman who spent 12 years keeping guests safe at sea. She was known for her calm demeanor, sharp instincts, and her ability to diffuse panic before it spread. But nothing in her career could have prepared her for what she discovered during her investigation into the ghost manifest. Chief Security Officer Linda Hayes had spent over a decade working on luxury liners, climbing the ranks from deck patrol officer to head of shipboard security. She was meticulous, respected by her crew, and trusted by the corporate office to keep things running smoothly. "I'd seen it all," she later said in her confidential deposition. "Overboard passengers, counterfeit passports, even smuggling attempts, but I'd never seen this." It was the third night of the Caribbean Meridian's voyage when Linda first encountered the mysterious family. She was making a late-round inspection of the forward dining decks when she saw them walking down the hall toward the children's arcade. A man in a light linen suit, his wife in a floral sundress, and two children laughing as they ran ahead. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Linda smiled and nodded at them, but as they passed, something about their presence gave her pause. The man's wristband didn't blink green at the security sensor by the arcade entrance, a system designed to log every passenger's location. The door opened anyway. She frowned, quietly pulling out her tablet to check their profiles. There were none. The arcade was empty when she stepped in moments later. No family, no children. The security camera feed for the last 10 minutes showed nothing but an empty hallway. Linda replayed the footage twice, then 3 times. The section where she'd watched them walk by was replaced by static. Later that night, she received a report from a bartender on deck 10 claiming he just served cocktails to a man in a white suit and his wife in a floral dress. Linda checked the timestamp, 5 minutes after she'd seen them enter the arcade. "This isn't possible," she muttered, pulling up the cabin registry. Every stateroom was occupied and accounted for, and no family matched that description. When she cross-checked against boarding photos taken in Miami, none of their faces appeared. It was as if they'd bypassed every layer of cruise ship security and simply materialized on board. The next day, Linda decided to stake out the dining hall. At 7:15 p.m., right on schedule, they arrived, cheerful, polite, and apparently unaware of the panic they were causing behind the scenes. They ordered a 5-course meal, laughed with their waiter, and posed for a photographer who wandered by. Linda snapped a discreet photo with her own device for reference. But when she checked the dining hall's reservation system, their table was marked empty. The ship's internal cameras recorded no guests seated there. The photographer later swore she hadn't taken any pictures of them that evening. Linda's unease deepened when she followed them after dinner. She trailed at a distance as they walked calmly to a corridor leading to cabin 7421. The family entered. Linda waited a few seconds, then swiped her master key to follow. The door wouldn't open. The lock light blinked red. Cabin 7421 didn't exist. Linda knelt to inspect the door panel. It was identical to every other cabin entrance on the ship. Polished brass handle, RFID scanner and a sleek number plate, 7421, but something felt off. The metal was ice cold to the touch, far colder than the surrounding air-conditioned hallway. Her master keycard, which had never failed her in 12 years of service, blinked red with an error code she'd never seen. Access denied, no system record. She double-checked her ship tablet. Cabin 7421 wasn't listed on any deck plans. Between cabins 7420 and 7422, there was supposed to be a solid bulkhead. No door, no room, no entry, yet here it was right in front of her. Linda called for backup over her radio, but all she got was static. She switched channels, tried again, and still nothing. "All right," she whispered, drawing a small flashlight from her belt. "We do this old school." She pressed her ear against the door. Inside, faintly, she heard laughter. The children's voices she'd heard earlier, soft giggles followed by the clinking of glasses. It sounded like a dinner party. Linda stepped back, heart pounding. She tried the handle, locked. She swiped her card again. Red light. Then she noticed something strange. A thin line of warm light seeping from beneath the door. It flickered softly like candlelight, completely out of place on a ship where every bulb was LED. She crouched down, peering through the crack at the bottom. For a split second, she saw a pair of polished leather shoes pacing across an old-fashioned carpet. The hem of a floral dress passed by, followed by the faint shadow of a boy clutching a toy car. The scene was quiet, domestic, almost serene. But when she blinked, the light vanished. Total darkness. Linda reached for her phone to snap a picture, but the screen froze, then shut off entirely. The hallway lights dimmed slightly, flickering as if the power grid had momentarily faltered. Suddenly, a soft knock echoed from the other side of the door. She froze. Another knock, slower this time. Then a voice, a man's voice, calm and polite. "Are you lost, ma'am?" Linda's breath caught in her throat. "This is security," she said firmly, her voice cracking despite her best effort to sound authoritative. "Open the door, please." The man chuckled lightly. "You're welcome to join us, you know. We've been expecting company." Linda took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to leave, but before she could turn, the lock clicked. The door creaked open an inch. She caught a brief glimpse of a warmly lit cabin interior, vintage decor, candlelit sconces, and a family seated at a round wooden table, smiling up at her. "Come in," the woman in the floral dress said warmly, her voice echoing unnaturally down the hall. Linda blinked, and the door slammed shut. The number plate above it flickered, then vanished entirely. Now there was just a smooth steel wall where cabin 7421 had been. Linda's hands trembled as she backed away from the wall where cabin 7421 had just been. She pulled her radio again, this time catching a faint signal. "Control, this is Hayes. We have a major security anomaly on deck 7 aft corridor. I need backup and engineering right now." "Copy that," a voice replied, crackling through static. "Stay put." Linda forced herself to breathe, glancing back at the wall. The polished steel was flawless. No seams, no door frame, no number plate, just an uninterrupted section of bulkhead. She snapped photos with her phone, but when she looked at them, they showed nothing but a dark, empty hallway. She scrolled to a picture she'd taken minutes earlier of the door's glowing crack, and found only corrupted gray pixels. Backup arrived minutes later, 2 officers and a maintenance engineer carrying a portable scanner. "Where's the door?" Officer Patel asked, scanning the blank wall. It was right here, Linda said, pointing to the spot. 7421, family inside. They invited me in. The door slammed and vanished. Patel exchanged a skeptical glance with the engineer who ran his scanner along the wall. Solid steel, he muttered. No hollow space, no cabin behind here, it's just a bulkhead. This corridor's layout hasn't changed in 20 years. Linda clenched her fists, then explained this. She pulled up the internal security feed for Deck 7. The footage from the past 10 minutes showed her walking alone down the hallway, pausing to inspect the wall, then pulling out her phone. There was no door, no family, nothing unusual. Hayes, you sure you're not overworked? Patel asked gently. Linda ignored him. She knew what she'd seen. She'd heard the laughter, the voice, seen that candlelit table. This wasn't fatigue or a trick of the light. Someone or something was erasing evidence. The next day, she quietly requested access to passenger photographs from embarkation. Over 900 guests had boarded in Miami, each one scanned and logged. Linda spent hours combing through thousands of faces, cross-referencing crew accounts of the mysterious family. A man in a linen suit, a woman in a floral dress, 2 children. She found them. They were smiling in their boarding photo, standing in front of the Caribbean Meridian logo. The timestamp matched embarkation day, but when she clicked their profile, an error popped up, file not found. No cabin assignment, no wristband data, no dining purchases. The image vanished from the screen as she stared at it, replaced by a blank gray silhouette. Her stomach churned. She called IT, pretending it was a technical glitch. They swore there was no record of those passengers ever boarding. That night, Linda returned to Deck 7. She walked slowly, flashlight in hand, stopping where the door had been. The wall was still seamless, but this time she heard faint music, a soft piano melody drifting from nowhere. Then came the laughter again, muffled but unmistakable. Security to all units, Linda whispered into her radio. They're here. The piano melody grew clearer as Linda crept down the corridor, her flashlight beam trembling against the steel walls. Each step she took echoed unnaturally, as if the hallway had doubled in length. The music wasn't coming from any speaker. It sounded live, like someone was playing in a parlor just beyond reach. She stopped where cabin 7421 had once been. Her breath fogged in front of her face. The air was colder here than anywhere else on Deck 7. Then, without warning, a warm glow appeared along the seams of the bulkhead. The steel rippled like water, and a doorway materialized before her eyes. The brass number plate glinted softly, 7421. Linda raised her radio. Control, I've got visual confirmation of something. I'm going in. Static hissed in response. She turned the handle. It was warm, almost too warm, and pushed. The cabin beyond was lavish, decorated in a style that didn't match any stateroom on the Caribbean Meridian. Rich mahogany furniture, antique lamps, patterned wallpaper from a bygone era. In the center of the room was a round table set for 4, complete with crystal glasses and polished silverware. The family sat exactly as she'd seen them in the brief glimpse before. The man in his linen suit, the woman in her floral dress, and 2 smiling children. They all turned to her in unison. "Welcome," the woman said cheerfully, her voice smooth but hollow. "We've been waiting for you." Linda froze, her hand tightening on the flashlight. "I'm with ship security," she said, voice trembling. "I need to verify your cabin number," and the man chuckled softly, raising his glass. "Oh, there's no need for all that. We're perfectly comfortable here." The boy set down his toy car and gestured for her to sit. "Stay for dinner," he said sweetly. Linda stepped back, heart hammering. "I need to confirm your names." The woman's smile widened unnaturally. "We've been here so long, names don't matter anymore." Linda's flashlight flickered. She glanced around the cabin, noticing details that made her skin crawl. The curtains swayed gently, though there was no draft. The plates of food were steaming hot, yet untouched. And in the reflection of the wall mirror, the family wasn't there at all. Only an empty table. Suddenly, the cabin door slammed behind her. Linda spun around and tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She pounded on it, shouting into her radio, but only static answered. "Please," she whispered, backing away. The children giggled, their voices overlapping in a distorted echo. The man rose from his chair, but his movements were stiff, puppet-like. "We don't get many visitors," he said calmly. "Most people don't find us." The woman stood as well, her face now pale and featureless in the flickering light. Linda's survival instincts kicked in. She lunged for the door with all her strength. The handle turned and she stumbled back into the hallway. She spun around, the doorway was gone. Just a cold, seamless wall. Linda staggered backward, slamming her shoulder into the opposite wall. The cold steel where the door had been gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. No sign of a hinge, a seam, or even a number plate, just smooth, unbroken bulkhead. Her breathing was ragged and her radio finally crackled to life. "Hayes, we lost your signal for a full 15 minutes. You okay?" She wanted to scream at them, but her voice came out shaky. "They are here, the family. They are not human." Silence on the other end. Then, "What family? There's nobody on deck 7 right now." Linda ran toward the nearest elevator, adrenaline surging through her veins. When she reached the security office, she demanded the footage from the past half hour. The recording showed her walking calmly down deck 7 corridor, pausing at the wall where she swore the door had been, and then standing completely still for 14 minutes, unmoving, staring at nothing. "Hayes, you need sleep," her second-in-command said, trying to mask concern. But Linda wasn't tired, she was terrified. The next morning, she tried to revisit cabin 7421 location. The corridor was brightly lit, bustling with guests heading to breakfast. But as she walked, she noticed something chilling. Multiple passengers greeting her warmly, as if they knew her name, despite never having met her. Among them, she spotted the little boy from the night before, clutching his toy car. He smiled and waved. Linda blinked and he vanished into the crowd. She ordered a full system sweep of the ship's security data. For hours, technicians scoured boarding manifests, RFID logs, and purchase histories. By late afternoon, one chilling pattern emerged. 13 separate families had been captured on camera throughout the voyage, eating dinner, attending shows, lounging by the pool, yet none were listed in the ship's manifest. Their assigned cabins, all non-existent. When Linda tried to print their embarkation photos, the images dissolved into corrupted files, replaced with static and error codes. "These aren't glitches," she whispered. "Someone or something is erasing them." 3 days later, the Caribbean Meridian docked in Nassau. Disembarking passengers streamed off the ship, laughing and waving. Linda stood near the gangway, scanning the crowd. Her stomach dropped. There was the man in the linen suit, the woman in the floral dress. Their 2 children skipped ahead, smiling, holding hands. They walked down the ramp like any other family, but when they reached the port terminal, they didn't pass through customs. They didn't head for a taxi or a shuttle. They simply disappeared. Security footage confirmed it. They faded out mid-step like a glitch in reality. The port cameras froze for a single frame before returning to normal. Linda resigned 2 weeks later. She never told corporate the full story, but in a private deposition for maritime security investigators, she left one final warning. They're not ghosts, they are residents. The ship belongs to them as much as it belongs to us, maybe more. Today, cruise staff whisper about phantom guests who board without tickets, occupy cabins that don't exist, and dine beside you without ever touching their food. So next time you're at sea and notice a smiling family you don't recall seeing before, don't try to follow them back to their cabin. This is Voices from the Other Side. If this story kept you on edge, hit like, share, and subscribe. Because next time we're diving deeper into security footage cruise lines tried to bury. Some guests never check out because they were never really alive. Story 4, Mayday from the Deep. A distress signal from a sunken cruise liner is heard live every year on its sinking anniversary, pinpointing its exact resting location. Modern cruise ships are equipped with some of the most advanced maritime communication systems on the planet. Satellite uplinks, encrypted radio channels, emergency beacons. Everything is designed to ensure that a single mayday call can summon rescue teams within minutes. Distress signals are logged, archived, and tracked down to the second, which is why when a series of radio operators began reporting a mayday transmission from the RMS Atlantic Majesty, a cruise liner that sank in 1977, the U.S. Coast Guard initially dismissed it as a prank. The Atlantic Majesty was a luxury liner, one of the largest ships of her time, carrying 300 passengers on a transatlantic journey from Boston to London. She vanished off the radar on a stormy March night. By the time rescue ships reached the last known coordinates, they found only debris. The hull was never recovered. Officially, she rests somewhere along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, her exact location still classified as unknown. But starting in 2018, on the anniversary of her sinking, Coast Guard radio stations along the eastern seaboard began receiving a transmission at precisely 11:47 p.m., the documented time she vanished beneath the waves. The message was faint, distorted, but chillingly clear. Mayday, Mayday. This is the RMS Atlantic Majesty. We are taking on water. Coordinates Mayday. The transmission always cut off mid-sentence. Each year it repeated exactly the same way. Same static pattern. Same faint crackle of voices shouting in the background. Same coordinates which pointed to an empty patch of ocean. I thought it was a sick joke at first, said former Coast Guard technician Paul Harrison, one of the first to log the call. But the voice, it sounded like an old maritime broadcast. You can hear the panic, the creaking of the hull. It didn't sound like a recording. It sounded live. Multiple ships were dispatched over the years to investigate the coordinates, but none found wreckage. Divers and sonar teams combed the area without results. The calls kept coming, each March 12th, right on schedule. That's when Voices from the Other Side got involved. Welcome to the only channel bringing you classified maritime investigations and recordings the cruise industry and Coast Guard don't want you to hear. These aren't ghost stories. These are documented cases, verified by FOIA requests and whistleblower testimony. Tonight's episode will take you inside one of the most chilling maritime mysteries of the past decade, a transmission from a ship that sank nearly 50 years ago. If this is your first time here, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Share this with anyone who works at sea, because they might have heard this call too. What you're about to hear has been sealed in federal archives, a broadcast from the depths of the Atlantic that refuses to die. The RMS Atlantic Majesty was a marvel of her time, a floating palace stretching 880 feet, adorned with chandeliers, gold-trimmed ballrooms, and grand dining halls meant to rival any five-star hotel. In March of 1977, she departed from Boston on a highly publicized transatlantic voyage bound for London, carrying 300 passengers and 860 crew. Among them were prominent businessmen, artists, and families seeking a luxury escape. But the North Atlantic was unpredictable that time of year. According to weather records, a sudden nor'easter developed faster than forecast, slamming the ship's route with gale-force winds and 40-foot waves. Passengers later reported hearing the hull groan under the pressure, dishes crashing in the dining rooms, and furniture sliding across the lavish decks. At 11:20 p.m., the bridge sent its first distress signal, a calm but urgent request for assistance. Coast Guard transcripts confirm the captain, Edward Hargreaves, reported minor flooding in a starboard cargo compartment. By 11:35 p.m., the tone of the calls changed dramatically. "We're taking on water in multiple holds. Request immediate evacuation support." The final confirmed broadcast came at 11:47 p.m. "Mayday, Mayday. This is the RMS Atlantic Majesty. Waters at the main deck. The call cut off abruptly. Minutes later, satellite radar tracking lost the ship's transponder. Rescue vessels dispatched to the coordinates arrived 8 hours later at dawn, finding nothing but lifeboats and floating debris. Survivors, just 312 of them, were pulled from the freezing water. The sinking became one of the deadliest maritime disasters of the late 20th century. The wreck was never found. Multiple expeditions in the following years scoured the coordinates provided by the final Mayday call, but found only jagged canyons and blackwater trenches over 2 miles deep. Conspiracy theories emerged. Some claimed the Majesty was struck by an uncharted iceberg. Others whispered about structural failure due to design flaws covered up by the ship's owners. For decades, the Atlantic Majesty's location remained a mystery, her resting place as elusive as the Titanic's had once been. Families of the victims held memorials every March 12th, honoring loved ones lost to the sea. Then, in 2018, a young Coast Guard radio operator in Virginia named Elena Carter heard the voice for the first time. It was late, almost midnight, when the channel crackled to life. "Mayday, Mayday, this is the RMS Atlantic Majesty, taking on water coordinates." Elena checked her logbook twice. The voice wasn't part of any training exercise. The coordinates matched the ship's last known position from 1977. The call ended abruptly, leaving only static. She filed a formal report. When her supervisor dismissed it as a prank using an old recording, she shrugged it off. But exactly 1 year later, on the same night at the same time, the call returned. Word spread quickly among Coast Guard operators. Midnight March 12th, tune into 16. You'll hear the dead ship calling. On the night of March 12, 2019, radio technicians across the eastern seaboard prepared in secret. Word of the mysterious ghost Mayday had circulated through Coast Guard channels for months, whispered between operators who didn't want to be laughed at by their superiors. This time, a handful of techs decided they would record everything. At precisely 11:47 p.m., Right on cue, the channel came alive with a burst of static and faint background noise. Wind howling, steel creaking, voices shouting in panic. Then came the calm, steady voice of a man, his British accent cutting clearly through the chaos. "Mayday, Mayday, this is the RMS Atlantic Majesty. We are taking on water, coordinates." The numbers followed clearly and concisely before the broadcast dissolved into crackling interference. The entire transmission lasted 32 seconds. What stunned technicians wasn't just the clarity, it was the fact that the call sounded live. Maritime experts who later analyzed the tape confirmed that the tonal qualities matched analog ship-to-shore equipment used in the 1970s. The background sounds, alarms, footsteps, splashing water, were too dynamic and layered to be a simple replay. It wasn't a tape loop. It was as if someone were speaking into a mic in real time from the Atlantic Ocean. That year, the Coast Guard dispatched a cutter, the US Resolute, to investigate the coordinates. Despite calm weather, perfect sonar conditions, and advanced submersible drones, they found nothing. No wreckage, no signal source, just empty, endless black water. The recording spread quietly among maritime operators, but higher-ups dismissed it. Likely a ham radio prank, one memo read. Possibly atmospheric skip causing old signals to bounce back, but radio engineers pushed back. Atmospheric skip could explain short bursts of interference, not a perfectly timed annual broadcast repeating at the same second each year. It's like the ocean itself is playing the call back, one operator said. By 2021, the phenomenon had escalated. Multiple listening stations from Maine to Bermuda logged identical transmissions, all synchronized down to the second. The voice was always the same, Captain Edward Hargreaves, calmly relaying coordinates as chaos erupted behind him. New layers of audio were noticed in later recordings, distant screams, water rushing, and a sound like tearing metal. Investigators made a chilling discovery. The coordinates Hargreaves repeated each year shifted slightly, mere fractions of a degree, forming a slow, creeping path across the seabed. Marine mapping experts concluded that if plotted, the drift traced a deep undersea trench system never fully explored. It was as if the Atlantic Majesty was moving. Some officers began refusing late-night shifts in March. One junior operator resigned after claiming she heard a child's voice whisper her name over the static. By 2023, whispers spread across Coast Guard bases. The Majesty doesn't just call for help, it wants someone to answer. In March of 2023, the Coast Guard partnered with NOAA and a private salvage company to finally investigate the coordinates of the mysterious broadcast. This time, they brought a state-of-the-art autonomous underwater vehicle, OVE, codenamed Deep Echo, capable of scanning at depths exceeding 3,000 meters. The plan was simple. If the RMS Atlantic Majesty lay somewhere in that trench, Deep Echo would find it. On March 12th, the team anchored the research vessel Endeavour above the broadcast coordinates, waiting for the clock to strike 11:47 p.m. The atmosphere on deck was tense. Many of the crew had heard the infamous call for themselves over the years. Some joked nervously, but others stayed silent, watching the waves churn under a moonless sky. At exactly 11:47, the transmission came through clearer than ever. "Mayday, Mayday. This is the RMS Atlantic Majesty. Water is rising, passengers in lifeboats, coordinates." The audio was accompanied by a distant alarm, faint screams, and something that sent chills down every spine. A child crying softly before the transmission abruptly cut off. Immediately, deep echo descended into the black abyss. Its sonar pinged steadily as it slipped past 1,000 meters. 1,502,000. The crew huddled in the control room, eyes fixed on the monitors. At 2,783 meters, deep echo's floodlights illuminated something massive, a jagged silhouette emerging from the darkness. The RMS Atlantic Majesty had been found, her once proud hull broken in two, resting in eerie silence. But there was something wrong. The ship's position matched the original 1977 coordinates exactly. Yet the coordinates broadcast in the last 3 years pointed to a trench over half a mile east. The salvage team speculated about shifting tectonic plates, but that didn't explain what they saw next. Deep Echo's high-resolution cameras swept across the decks. Passenger chairs were still bolted in place. Lifeboat davits rusted but intact. And then, one operator gasped, "Zoom in on Deck C now." The camera tightened on a row of lifeboats still hanging over the side, and in one of them sat a figure. It was a man in a captain's uniform, his back turned to the camera. The details were unmistakable: the white peaked cap, the gold epaulets, and a hand gripping the lifeboat's side. The feed crackled with static as Deep Echo drifted closer. "Hello," a crew member blurted instinctively over the comms, though they knew the man couldn't hear them. The captain's head turned. For a split second, the camera caught a face, pale, bloated, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a silent scream. The lights flickered and the feed went black. Deep Echo's telemetry cut out. All signals were lost. When they pulled the AUV back up hours later, its hull was ice cold, coated in an oily residue. The last frame recorded before the blackout showed something even stranger: a hand pressed against the camera lens from the inside. The Endeavor's control room was silent except for the hum of machinery. Everyone stared at the frozen image on the monitor, that pale, screaming face and the unmistakable hand pressed against the lens. Was that inside the ROV? One technician whispered. "Impossible," muttered the mission lead, Dr. Karen Lowe. "It's sealed, pressure-rated to 3,000 meters. There's no way." Her words were cut off by a shrill noise erupting from the communications console. The ghostly Mayday transmission was back, but this time it wasn't faint or distant. It roared through the speakers, crisp and deafening, as if someone were shouting into a microphone on their ship. "Mayday, Mayday. This is the RMS Atlantic Majesty. We are sinking. We need..." The voice cut off with a screech of feedback that made everyone cover their ears. Then came knocking. Slow, deliberate bangs echoed through the research vessel, reverberating up from the hull. The sonar operator froze. "Contact at 50 meters beneath us," he said in a shaky voice. "It's big, Doctor." Lowe grabbed the intercom, ordering deckhands to check for debris, but when they peered over the side with spotlights, there was nothing but black water. The knocking grew louder. A junior technician, Elena Carter, the same operator who'd first reported the broadcast in 2018, clutched her headphones. I hear them," she whispered. "Voices, they're screaming." Everyone went still. The ROV feed suddenly flickered back online for a split second, showing not the wreck, but a crowd of passengers standing in darkness. Dozens of pale faces stared directly into the lens, their mouths moving in silent pleas. Then the screen cut to static again. "Pull it up, now," Dr. Lowe barked. As the winch groaned, hauling deep echo up from the abyss, the deck crew reported icy mist rising from the ocean's surface. The temperature dropped sharply, their breath fogged in the floodlights. One sailor swore he saw hands reaching up through the waves, white, skeletal, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. When the ROV finally broke the surface, its cameras were shattered from the inside, the glass spider-webbed with cracks. The oily residue coating its hull reeked of salt and decay. The Mayday call returned, but this time it was chaotic, overlapping voices, screams, metal twisting. In the background, a voice, calm and clear, cut through. "Coordinates confirmed. Please hurry." The coordinates streamed clearly over the speakers, but when plotted, they were 20 miles east of their current location, nowhere near the wreck they had just found. At 3:14 a.m., the knocking on the hull stopped abruptly. The radio went silent. The crew barely slept. By dawn, the mission was called off. Officially, Deep Echo's damage was blamed on unidentified debris. The recordings were marked classified by the Coast Guard, but every crew member present that night privately admitted the same thing. They hadn't been alone out there. Something was moving beneath the ship, watching them. The Endeavour limped back to port under strict orders from the Coast Guard. No discussion of the events, no sharing recordings, and no mention of what Deep Echo's cameras captured. The footage was classified within hours of docking. Crew members were quietly interviewed, their testimony sealed in federal archives. But secrets have a way of slipping through cracks. 3 weeks later, a technician who'd worked on the mission, Mark Reyes, disappeared from his home in Norfolk. Police found his laptop open to a grainy, enhanced still of Deep Echo's final frame, that pale hand pressed against the glass. The file's metadata showed it had been opened dozens of times in the days before his disappearance. Neighbors reported hearing faint knocking at his front door every night around midnight. No one was there when they checked. Mark was never found. Dr. Lowe, the mission lead, took an extended leave of absence, citing psychological distress. A confidential memo later leaked, describing her nightmares. She hears Captain Hargreaves' voice calling coordinates in her sleep, always new numbers, always closer to shore. In the following years, the ghost transmission spread. Amateur radio operators, hobbyists, and even cargo ships began reporting the Mayday broadcast, but not just on March 12th anymore. The calls started appearing sporadically, at random times, sometimes inland, far from the ocean. Reports described hearing rushing water, screaming passengers, and an eerie sense of being listened to. One ham radio enthusiast claimed he triangulated a signal source over 100 miles from the coast. It wasn't bouncing, he said in a podcast interview. It felt alive, like it was moving to find me. Weeks later, he shut down his channel without explanation. Satellite mapping experts have since traced the coordinates provided each year by the ghost transmission. They form a slow-moving path along the mid-Atlantic ridge, heading steadily westward. Some maritime analysts have suggested, quietly and without official backing, that the ship isn't resting. It's drifting. By 2025, several commercial vessels reported engine failures and sudden drops in temperature near the Majesty's supposed route. One freighter's security footage captured something startling. Sonar readings showed a massive moving object shadowing their course, but nothing was visible on radar. The freighter's captain swore he heard the Mayday call coming from his own PA system, even though no one had touched the radio. Today, The ghost broadcast of the RMS Atlantic Majesty is treated like an urban legend among sailors, but insiders know the truth. The recordings exist. They've been analyzed, enhanced, and confirmed to be live transmissions. Experts who have reviewed them privately admit they can hear more than just one voice now. Dozens of overlapping pleas for help, some in languages not spoken on board in 1977. Every March, Coast Guard operators man their posts in silence, dreading 11:47 p.m. And every year, right on time, the Mayday comes through. The same voice, the same calm, steady captain giving out coordinates. But those coordinates are always closer. This is Voices from the Other Side. If this story chilled you, hit like, share, and subscribe, because next week we'll uncover more classified maritime horror the cruise industry doesn't want you to know. Some wrecks never rest, and some ships refuse to sink alone. Story 5. The Babysitter Cabin. Crew reports nightly calls to the infirmary from a cabin that hasn't been booked since a child's death 10 years ago. Every cruise ship has its share of ghost stories, tales whispered by crew members on overnight shifts, strange noises in empty corridors, and lights flickering in cabins that should be locked tight. But aboard the Ocean Aurora, there's one story that's not just a rumor. It's been logged, time-stamped, and reported to corporate headquarters more than a dozen times over the last decade. The reports all start the same way. A phone call to the infirmary at exactly 2:13 a.m. Medical officers describe picking up the line to hear a soft, trembling child's voice. "Please, my babysitter's not waking up." The caller always gives the same cabin number, 5143. But according to booking records, cabin 5143 hasn't been occupied since a tragedy on board in 2015, when a 6-year-old passenger named Lily Morgan was found alone in her cabin, crying over the lifeless body of her teenage babysitter. The babysitter's death was ruled a sudden cardiac arrest. Lily was unharmed, but the trauma of that night haunted her family. They never sailed again. After the incident, cabin 5143 was sealed off and removed from the booking system entirely. On deck plans, it doesn't even exist anymore. But crew members say that every few months during long voyages, the call returns, always at 2:13 a.m. sharp. "The first time I got it, I thought I was dreaming," said Elena Vasquez, a senior nurse who's worked on the Aurora for 12 years. Her voice was so small, so scared. She said her babysitter wouldn't wake up. "I asked for her name and she whispered Lily. I ran straight to deck 5, but the door was sealed. When I called security, they swore no one was registered there. I heard crying through the door, but when we forced it open, it was empty." Phone logs confirm multiple infirmary calls originating from cabin 5143 landline. Yet when technicians checked the system, they found the cabin's phone disconnected from the network. "I replaced that phone myself when we decommissioned the room," said ship electrician Tom Riley. "It shouldn't even have power." Corporate security labeled the reports unsubstantiated and told the crew to focus on guest experience. But the calls kept coming. Some nurses stopped answering the phone after midnight. Here at Voices from the Other Side, we investigate maritime incidents buried in corporate archives and sealed under federal confidentiality agreements. These aren't just creepy campfire stories. They are verified events, backed by logs, recordings, and eyewitness testimony. Tonight, we're taking you inside a case that forced even hardened security officers to request shore assignments. If this is your first time here, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss our deep dives into real-life maritime mysteries. And if you're ever sailing on the Aurora, don't stay near Deck 5, because someone or something in cabin 5143 is still calling for help. The official incident report from June 18, 2015 reads like any tragic but straightforward medical emergency at sea. Passenger name redacted, female, 17, found unresponsive in cabin. Declared deceased at 2:38 a.m. Cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest. But crew members who were there that night insist the details never made it into the corporate file. The Ocean Aurora was halfway through a 7-day Caribbean route when the Morgans, a family from Ohio, booked a last-minute babysitting service for their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. It was formal night, and they didn't want to miss the captain's gala dinner. Their assigned sitter was Emily Parker, a quiet, responsible teen who worked part-time in the kids' club. She'd been with the cruise line for 6 months. According to interviews, Emily played board games with Lily, tucked her into bed, and settled into the armchair with a book. At 2:10 a.m., the ship's internal cameras last captured Emily leaving the cabin briefly, likely to grab water or snacks from a nearby crew pantry. She returned less than 3 minutes later, looking pale and hurried, clutching her chest as she swiped her key card. That was the last time she was seen alive. At 2:13 a.m., the infirmary phone rang. A small, shaky voice whispered, "Please help, my babysitter won't wake up." Security officers sprinted to cabin 5143 and found Lily curled up on the floor, crying. Emily lay slumped on the bed, her eyes wide open, body cold but inexplicably rigid, as if she'd been gone much longer than a few minutes. The onboard doctor pronounced her dead on the scene, but the autopsy later revealed no underlying health issues, no toxins, and no explanation for her sudden cardiac arrest. "There was something about the way she looked," said Officer Daniel Ng, one of the first responders. "It wasn't just death. Her face was frozen like she'd seen something before she went." The Morgans disembarked early in Puerto Rico, devastated. Lily clung to her mother, repeating the same thing to every crew member who tried to comfort her. "I told her not to let him in." When asked who him was, Lily clammed up. After the tragedy, cabin 5143 was sealed. The babysitting program was quietly overhauled. Emily's death became a line item in a corporate safety report, officially ruled natural causes. But crew members whispered about the cabin, how guests complained of cold drafts and knocking sounds before it was decommissioned, how electronics would fail near its door, and how security cameras facing that section often glitched out. By the end of 2015, the room was scrubbed from the booking system. On guest maps, there's nothing between 5142 and 5144. But crews still walk past the door every day, pretending not to notice the faint scratches around the keycard slot. And then, in early 2016, the infirmary phone rang at 2:13 a.m. again. By February of 2016, the story of Emily Parker's sudden death had faded from public memory. But for the Ocean Aurora's crew, cabin 5143 was a constant reminder. The door remained locked, sealed with a corporate notice, "Cabin out of service." Most crew members avoided that section of Deck 5 entirely, especially at night. Then came the first call. It was 2:13 a.m., almost 8 months after the tragedy. Nurse Claire Simmons was on overnight shift in the infirmary when the phone rang. She checked the caller ID, 5143. That was impossible, Claire later testified in an internal safety review. The phone was disconnected. That cabin wasn't even on our booking software anymore. I assumed it was a system glitch, but I picked up. A child's voice whispered, "Please help." Claire froze. "Sweetheart, who is this?" she asked, trying to sound calm. "Lily," the voice said, clear as day. "My babysitter won't wake up." Claire's blood ran cold. She grabbed her med kit and called security. Within 2 minutes, Officer Daniel Ng arrived at her side, the same man who'd been first on the scene in 2015. They sprinted to Deck 5. The corridor was silent, the air unusually cold. When they reached 5143, the door was still locked, the corporate seal intact. Claire pressed her ear to the wood and swore she heard a child sobbing softly on the other side. Daniel inserted a master key card, but the door wouldn't budge. The lock light blinked red, though it should have overridden any cabin door. Suddenly, the sobbing stopped. Then came a sound neither of them would forget, a sharp, slow knock, 3 deliberate bangs from inside the sealed cabin. Daniel stepped back, hand on his radio. "Security to control. We've got activity in 5143. Control responded quickly, dispatching backup officers and a maintenance tech. Within minutes, they'd removed the seal, bypassed the lock, and pushed the door open. The cabin was empty. Lights flickered as the team searched every corner. The bed was perfectly made, the curtains drawn. Dust covered the furniture, proof that no one had stayed there in months. And yet the air smelled faintly of baby powder and lavender, the same scent noted in Emily's file. The cabin phone, supposedly disconnected, sat on the nightstand. Its screen displayed a single outgoing call. Infirmary 2:13 a.m. They yanked the phone line and cut power to the room. A security camera was installed outside the door the next day. But a week later, Claire got another call. Same time, same voice, same words. "Please, my babysitter won't wake up." When security reviewed the camera footage, they found something chilling. At 2:13 a.m., the feed flickered to static. When it came back, the hallway was empty. But on the glossy surface of cabin 5143 door, faint handprints appeared in condensation. Small ones. That was the night the crew stopped dismissing the calls as glitches. By 2018, cabin 5143 had become infamous among the Ocean Aurora's night staff. Crew who worked graveyard shifts avoided Deck 5 entirely, claiming they felt watched near the sealed door. Some reported hearing a child humming lullabies in the corridor. Others swore they'd seen shadows moving under the doorframe even though the cabin was locked and dark. But it wasn't until July 14, 2018 that the haunting escalated. Security officer Miguel Alvarez was patrolling Deck 5 around 2 a.m. when the infirmary radioed. Another call had come through from cabin 5143. Miguel was nearby, so he went straight there. The corridor was empty and ice cold. His breath fogged as he approached the door. He raised his radio. "Control, I'm at 5143, requesting maintenance override." Before Control could respond, a sound came from inside the cabin, a child's voice, muffled but clear. "Help me, please help me." Miguel froze, heart pounding. "Lily," he whispered instinctively. Silence. Then a man's voice answered from inside, low and calm. "She's fine, go back." Miguel stumbled back, hand flying to his holster. "Control, there's someone inside," adult male voice responding. Backup officers arrived within minutes. Together they forced the door open with a hydraulic spreader. The room was dark, air thick with the smell of mildew. Dust coated every surface, but there was something new. The cabin phone was off the hook, swinging gently. Miguel stepped inside, flashlight beam sweeping the room. That's when they saw it. On the mirror above the dresser, words scrawled in condensation like someone had traced letters with a finger. "Don't wake him." The phrase dripped slowly down the glass as if freshly written. The search team tore the cabin apart. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence of anyone having been inside. Maintenance swore the lock was intact. Yet the officers couldn't shake the chill in the air or the sense that someone had been standing just out of sight. When they replayed hallway camera footage, the same glitch appeared. Static at exactly 2:13 a.m. When the feed returned, Miguel could be seen standing alone, radio raised, speaking into the silence. No audio of the male voice was recorded, though Miguel's radio log confirmed he'd reported it in real time. Crew morale plummeted. Even veteran officers refused to patrol Deck 5 alone. Some staff transferred off the Aurora, citing mental health concerns. Corporate quietly marked cabin 5143 as structurally unsound to explain why it was permanently sealed. But the calls kept coming. Nurses began logging details, breathing patterns, background noises, even faint lullabies in the distance. One recording captured a child crying softly, whispering, "He's here," followed by a long, dragging sound like furniture scraping across the floor. Yet every time security rushed to the room, they found nothing but dust, silence, and that same swinging phone. By early 2019, the calls from cabin 5143 had become impossible for corporate to ignore. Passenger complaints about cold spots near Deck 5 and whispers of a haunted room were spreading online, threatening the Ocean Aurora's luxury reputation. So the cruise line quietly assembled a special investigation team, a mix of engineers, tech specialists, and a discreet consultant with a background in paranormal phenomena. The team boarded the ship in Miami under the guise of performing a safety audit. Among them was Dr. Amelia Roth, a behavioral scientist with a history of consulting on unusual incidents in hotels and historic landmarks. "I don't chase ghosts," she told the ship's captain during their briefing. "I just observe patterns." They started with the technical side. Engineers tore into cabin 5143 wiring, communications lines, and lock system. The cabin phone was removed and examined. Tests confirmed that the line was completely severed. It had been disconnected from the ship's network since 2016. Yet logs showed over 24 outgoing calls to the infirmary, all precisely at 2:13 a.m. "We're not talking about a glitch," said lead tech Marcus Lee, shaking his head. "This isn't even physically possible. The phone's dead." Security footage was also analyzed. Over 40 hours of recordings revealed the same disturbing pattern. Static distortion every night between 2:12 and 2:14 a.m. During one particularly grainy segment, the team enhanced the frames and saw what looked like a small shadow crouched behind the door, but no one was physically there when officers arrived. Then came Amelia's turn. She asked for all lights on Deck 5 to be dimmed that evening. At 2 a.m., she stationed herself outside 5143 with a handheld EMF meter, a thermal camera, and a small voice recorder. Security monitored her from a distance. At 2:13 a.m., the cabin phone rang. Amelia placed her recorder to the door. A child's whisper came through faintly. "He's still here." The EMF meter spiked violently. The hallway temperature dropped to 45 degrees F, 7 degrees C in under 10 seconds. Officers watching from the control room swore they saw a second shadow appear beside Amelia on the monitor, tall and slender, though she stood alone. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from inside 5143. Amelia flinched, backing away, but held the recorder steady. A man's voice, low and calm, spoke just once. "Leave her alone." The word "her" was drawn out, chilling. Security rushed in seconds later, unlocking the door, but the cabin was empty except for the dresser mirror. Words were etched into the glass, this time deep enough to scratch the surface. "She's safe with me." Amelia collected her equipment, visibly shaken. "This isn't residual energy," she told the captain. "This is intelligent. Someone is protecting Lily. But it doesn't feel human." Corporate sealed the cabin permanently after that night. All investigation notes were classified. But the calls didn't stop. After the investigation, cabin 5143 was officially welded shut. The doorframe was reinforced, cameras were installed at both ends of the corridor, and the ship's internal schematics were updated to show a maintenance closet in its place. The cruise line thought burying the story would stop the rumors. But among the crew, the whispers only grew louder. Night staff started calling that stretch of Deck 5 the babysitter hall. Engineers assigned to check wiring there often refused to work alone, claiming they'd hear a child's laughter echoing down the hallway, followed by soft knocking from inside the sealed cabin. One electrician swore he heard a man humming a lullaby. Then, in late 2021, something happened that shook even the skeptics. At 2:13 a.m., the infirmary received another call from 5143. This time, the line stayed open for almost 2 minutes. Nurse Vasquez, the same woman who'd heard Lily's voice years ago, kept the caller talking. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" she asked gently. "She won't wake up," Lily whispered. "Who won't wake up, honey?" "My babysitter," came the reply, followed by soft sobbing. And then, for the first time, a third voice joined the call. A calm, deep male voice. "Stop asking questions." The line went dead. Security reviewed the call logs and surveillance footage immediately. The corridor cameras showed nothing but static during the call. However, one frame stood out. For less than half a second, a shadowy figure appeared near the sealed door, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a crew uniform from the 1970s. The footage was quickly archived and marked confidential. Crew gossip exploded. Some said the man was a former staffer who died on board decades ago, cursed to guard Lily forever. Others believed he wasn't protecting her, he was keeping her there. In 2022, a veteran security officer quit mid-contract after a terrifying encounter. While patrolling Deck 5, his radio crackled with a child's voice whispering his name. When he turned, he saw cabin 5143 keypad glowing faint green, as if someone had just swiped a key card. He ran. Today, cabin 5143 doesn't appear on the Aurora's guest maps. New crew members are told it's just a storage space, but veterans warn them. Don't linger near that door at night. If you hear a phone ring, keep walking. One engineer broke the unspoken rule. During a dry dock inspection, he pressed his ear to the sealed door. He later told colleagues he heard Lily's voice say, "He's coming." The next day, the man slipped and fell down a maintenance ladder, breaking his leg. Coincidence? Maybe. The calls still come. Same time, same plea. Always a scared little girl asking for help no one can give. And if you're ever aboard the Ocean Aurora and wake at 2:13 a.m. to hear a child's voice through your cabin phone, don't answer, because some guests never check out. This is Voices from the Other Side. If this case sent chills down your spine, like, share, and subscribe, because next week we'll cover an investigation corporate tried to erase from Maritime records. Some cabins aren't just haunted, they are occupied. Story 6. The Mirror Bay Incident. Surveillance footage shows a mirror version of the ship with duplicates of crew and passengers, only visible on certain cameras. Every modern cruise ship has a sophisticated network of surveillance cameras, designed to cover every hallway, lounge, and deck for safety and liability. On the MS Pacific Horizon, those cameras caught something no one could explain, something that forced corporate security to pull weeks of footage, install encryption locks, and quietly fire half a dozen crew members who couldn't stop talking about it. It began as a routine tech issue. On August 9, 2022, a junior IT technician named Chris Lau was troubleshooting a flickering hallway camera on Deck 7. The footage kept glitching every night at 3:07 a.m. When he replayed the tape, the hallway appeared normal at first, then froze. When the image unfroze, the layout of the ship had flipped. Furniture was reversed, signage mirrored, and even the emergency exit arrows pointed the wrong way. Chris thought it was a corrupted recording until he noticed something more disturbing. A woman walking through the mirrored hallway, holding hands with a child. The problem? That section of Deck 7 was completely empty at that time, and passenger logs confirmed there were no families assigned to nearby cabins. When Chris enhanced the frame, he realized the woman's face looked eerily similar to his co-worker in guest services, right down to her distinctive scar. But this copy was wearing a uniform design the cruise line had retired years ago. Chris flagged the footage to his supervisor, who initially laughed it off. "Probably some old feed got overlaid," he said, but when they checked the timestamp, the video was live. The next night, they monitored the feed at 3:07 a.m. sharp. Again, the hallway shifted into its mirrored version. This time, a group of passengers in formal wear walked past, faces blank, moving in perfect unison. One man turned toward the camera, and for a split second, his face was an exact duplicate of a guest currently on board, someone who'd been dining in the ship's steakhouse at that exact moment. Chris's supervisor went pale. "Shut it down," he whispered. They disconnected the feed, but the damage was done. Word spread quickly among IT staff. There was a section of the Horizon surveillance system showing a mirror ship with duplicates of real passengers and crew. Some claimed the mirrored footage even showed events before they happened, like a spilled tray in the dining room, captured an hour before it occurred in reality. The ship's captain, Robert Grant, ordered an internal investigation. Cameras were swapped, servers inspected, and encrypted hard drives collected by corporate. Crew were warned not to discuss camera anomalies with guests. But the footage didn't stop, and the duplicates, they were starting to notice the cameras too. Captain Robert Grant ordered a covert investigation into what crew were now calling the Mirror Bay glitch. To avoid alarming guests, The IT team was instructed to work only during the ship's graveyard shift, when most passengers were asleep and corridors were empty. Chris Lau and his supervisor, Anthony Vega, set up a live monitoring station in the Horizon's security hub. They installed a dedicated feed for the troublesome Deck 7 camera and added 2 others nearby to see if the anomaly spread. At 3:06 a.m., all 3 cameras froze for a single frame. Chris leaned forward, watching the static. "Here it comes," he whispered. At 3:07 a.m., sharp, the monitors flickered back on. The hallway was reversed again, perfectly mirrored. The safety signage and cabin numbers were backward, and even the carpeting pattern flipped direction. But this time, something was different. The screen showed Chris himself, seated at the security console, staring into the camera. Except this version of Chris was wearing a different shirt, an old Pacific Horizon polo with a discontinued logo from 5 years ago. He wasn't typing or working, he was watching. The mirrored Chris raised his hand and waved at the camera. Chris jolted out of his chair, his heart pounding. Anthony swore under his breath, leaning close to the feed. "Is that you?" Before Chris could answer, the figure leaned forward, smiling, and mouthed something silently. Chris swore he saw his own lips forming the words, "We see you." Then, just as suddenly, the feed cut back to the real hallway, empty, silent. They rewound the footage frame by frame. The mirrored version of the security room wasn't supposed to exist. There were no cameras pointing at their station. And yet, every detail in the background was accurate. The placement of the monitors, the snack wrappers on the desk, even Anthony's coffee mug mirrored perfectly. Anthony muttered, "Someone's playing a prank with a looped video feed," but Chris shook his head. "That wasn't a loop." He waved back at me. Over the next week, the IT team rotated shifts to monitor the glitch. Every night at 3:07 a.m., the same mirrored version of Deck 7 appeared. Sometimes, duplicates of passengers walked by, people who were verified to be asleep in their cabins at the time. On August 14, Anthony froze when he saw his own double escorting a group of passengers down the mirrored hallway, all of them moving in perfect synchronization, eyes fixed straight ahead. "That's me, but I've never worn that uniform," Anthony whispered. Corporate security collected the hard drives again, ordering the team to stop recording anomalies. But Chris secretly saved a copy of the footage on an encrypted flash drive. That night, the anomaly spread to 2 more cameras. Both showed mirrored hallways and silent duplicates walking in formation. One of them paused to stare directly into the lens. For the first time, the duplicate smiled. On August 16, 2022, Captain Grant authorized a late-night sweep of Deck 7 to reassure staff and prove the footage was a technical artifact. Security officers Miguel Alvarez and Sarah Klein volunteered, armed with radios, flashlights, and body cams. Chris Lau monitored their feed from the security hub, determined to catch the anomaly in real time. At 3:05 a.m., Miguel and Sarah reached the corridor outside cabin 7212, the same hallway where most anomalies had been recorded. The air felt colder than the rest of the ship, though ventilation checks confirmed nothing was wrong. "Control, we're in position," Miguel whispered. "Copy," Chris responded. 2 minutes out. The officers paced slowly, body cams transmitting live. Chris's hands trembled as he switched between angles, the live hallway feed and the notorious Deck 7 camera. Both showed Miguel and Sarah moving cautiously, flashlights sweeping the empty hall. At 3:07 a.m. exactly, the surveillance feed glitched, a brief flash of static, and when it returned, Miguel and Sarah were gone from the hallway camera. Chris leaned closer. Where the hell? Then he froze. The mirrored feed came online, but this time, Miguel and Sarah were still visible inside the mirrored version of Deck 7. The carpeting was reversed, signage backward, and the lighting dimmer, almost gray. "Control, do you copy?" Sarah's voice crackled over the radio, sounding distorted. "We see you," Chris said. "Just stay put." "What do you mean stay put?" "The hall just went dark. We can't see the end of the corridor." Sarah's voice trembled slightly. In the mirrored feed, a shadow appeared at the far end of the hall. A group of passengers walked toward Miguel and Sarah, faces blank, movements stiff. They were duplicates of real guests currently asleep in their cabins. "Guys," Chris whispered into the mic, "turn around, now." The officers spun around, flashlights scanning the hall. Their body cams showed nothing. But on the mirrored feed, the duplicates were getting closer. One man, a tall, gaunt figure, stopped and looked directly at the camera. His face was Miguel's, expressionless, eyes black voids. "Control, who's at the end of the hall?" Miguel asked. Chris's voice cracked. "Miguel, it's you." The duplicates advanced in eerie unison. Suddenly, every radio in the security hub erupted with static, followed by a whisper, deep and layered, like dozens of voices speaking in unison. "You shouldn't be here." Miguel cursed and sprinted toward the stairwell with Sarah close behind. Their body cams flickered and for a split second showed them running in the wrong direction, as if their footage was mirrored too. Back in the control room, Chris watched the feed glitch violently. When it stabilized, Miguel and Sarah were gone. The hallway camera showed an empty corridor. Then Miguel's voice came through, panting. We're back on Deck 6. Don't send anyone else down there." The mirrored feed stayed online for 3 minutes after they fled, showing the duplicates standing silently in formation, all staring straight into the lens. When Miguel and Sarah returned shaken and pale, Captain Grant ordered all body cam and surveillance footage secured for immediate review. The tapes were analyzed in the security hub by a small team: Chris Lau, Anthony Vega, and 2 senior officers. No one else on board was allowed access. At first, the footage appeared routine, the officers walking cautiously down Deck 7, radios crackling softly. But when the timestamp hit 3:07 a.m., the video distorted. Static washed over the frame, and when it cleared, the hallway had reversed. The exit signs now pointed the wrong way, cabin numbers were mirrored, and even the officers' names on their badges appeared backward. "Pause that," Anthony muttered. "That's not a software glitch, that's perspective." They slowed the footage frame by frame. Behind Sarah, a second hallway was briefly visible in the reflection of a polished glass frame. It wasn't the one she stood in. It was a dim, shadowed corridor lined with unfamiliar artwork and furniture styles from decades ago. Then the duplicates appeared. As the officers advanced, the mirror passengers emerged in perfect formation. They weren't walking like tourists. They were moving with precision, as if choreographed. Their faces were blank, their eyes black voids. One frame froze Anthony in place. A man in the crowd who looked identical to him, right down to the mole on his jaw. This duplicate was wearing a formal officer's jacket, but the rank insignia wasn't standard. In fact, none of their uniforms were. "Zoom on that," Anthony whispered. Chris enhanced the frame. The badge on the duplicate's chest bore a logo not used by Pacific Horizon or any cruise line they recognized. "It's not just a reflection," Chris murmured. It's another ship. The footage grew more chaotic. Miguel's flashlight beam passed over a wall-mounted evacuation map, but the map displayed an unfamiliar deck plan with 10 levels, even though the horizon only had 8. The escape routes were different. The stairwells led to places that didn't exist. Then came the sound. Through the static, a faint chorus of whispers layered over each other like waves. At first, they were unintelligible. But as the officers ran, the whispers grew louder, resolving into a chilling phrase repeated by dozens of voices. "Stay with us." When the officers fled toward the stairwell, the footage briefly split-screened, showing 2 versions of them running. One in the real corridor, one in the mirrored ship, pursued by the silent duplicates. The 2 versions overlapped for a moment, then the feed went black. Chris paused the video, his hands trembling. "They weren't just watching us," he said. "They were trying to pull us in." The captain ordered all footage encrypted and physically secured in a locked server rack. But that night, a technician walking past the security hub swore he saw another Chris through the window, seated at the console, smiling, while the real Chris was in the mess hall. By August 20, the anomaly wasn't contained to one camera anymore. Security reported that 5 additional feeds across decks 6 through 8 were now glitching at 3:07 a.m. each night. Some flickered briefly, while others stayed locked in the mirrored view for up to 10 minutes. Passengers began filing complaints about cold spots and strange reflections in corridor mirrors. A woman claimed she saw herself in a bathroom mirror turn away a second too late. Another reported bumping into a man in a crew uniform near the elevator, only to realize no one was there. Captain Grant knew he was losing control. He ordered Deck 7 sealed off to all passengers under the guise of plumbing repairs. The security checkpoints were installed at both stairwells, and all staff were briefed to stay clear after midnight. But the crew's fear only grew. On the night of August 22, Chris monitored live feeds while 2 security officers patrolled near Deck 7's sealed corridor. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the glitch spread across 8 cameras simultaneously. The mirrored ship came into view on every screen. Same corridors, but darker, colder, with flickering lights and rust on the walls. Then they saw movement. Dozens of duplicates filled the mirrored hallways, standing shoulder to shoulder in eerie silence. Every one of them was staring directly into the cameras. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered from her post in the control room. "They are lined up." In unison, the duplicates raised their hands and pointed at the lens. Suddenly, the real hallway lights flickered. The 2 security officers on Deck 7 radioed in. "Panicked. Control, we're hearing footsteps, multiples coming from both directions." The mirrored feed confirmed it. Their duplicates were approaching from both ends of the hallway, perfectly synchronized with their movements. The officers sprinted for the stairwell. Chris's heart pounded as he switched feeds. For a terrifying moment, the officers' body cams showed them running in the mirrored ship, not the real one. The stairwell door ahead looked corroded and warped. Behind them, their duplicates closed in, faces pale and expressionless. "Get out now," Captain Grant barked over the radio. As the officers reached the stairwell, the feed distorted violently. Static overtook the screens, and when it cleared, both men were back in the real ship, slamming the door behind them. One of them vomited on the landing, whispering, "They were right behind us." The captain didn't hesitate. He ordered Deck 7 sealed entirely, shutting down power and rerouting all passenger traffic to other decks. Technicians physically disconnected the cameras, but even with no power, the monitors in the control room continued to flicker at 3:07 a.m., showing glimpses of the mirror corridors. One image captured that night still circulates among ex-crew members, a group of duplicates standing in formation, holding lifeboat oars and staring blankly at the lens. In the background, an evacuation map showed a ship design that didn't match the horizon schematics. "This isn't just a reflection," Chris whispered to Anthony. "It's a whole other ship, and it's leaking into ours." After the August lockdown, Deck 7 remained sealed for the rest of the Pacific Horizon's voyage. Guests were told it was due to a plumbing malfunction, but crew morale collapsed. Officers refused to patrol the deck alone, and several staff quietly requested early termination of their contracts. Corporate security flew in a private investigation team at the next port, escorted under the cover of night. For 5 days, the investigators combed through every camera feed, hard drive, and wiring closet while the ship's captain was confined to private meetings. Crew who asked questions were told to focus on guest experience, but rumors spread quickly. One IT engineer claimed the team had discovered 2 parallel systems running through the ship's servers, one logging real-time footage, the other logging an alternate timeline. "They said our ship's cameras weren't glitching," the engineer whispered to Chris over coffee. "They were connected to something else." The whispers grew louder when maintenance staff spotted investigators boarding the horizon with industrial mirrors strapped to carts. These mirrors were placed at key hallway intersections on Deck 7 not for decoration, but as a barrier. Crew were ordered never to touch them. That night, Chris broke protocol and checked the surveillance feeds. What he saw made his blood run cold. The cameras showed the mirrored ship in crystal clarity. Rusted walls, flickering emergency lights, and lifeboats hanging in pieces. Through a shattered observation window, Chris could see open water, but it wasn't calm, it was pitch black, as though reflecting an ocean beneath a starless sky. Then he saw himself again. The duplicate Chris stood in the mirrored security hub, staring into the lens with a blank expression. This time, he wasn't alone. A woman in a stewardess uniform from the 1970s stood behind him, her face blurred like a smudged photo. She raised her hand and placed it on his shoulder, and the duplicate smiled. Chris yanked the plug from the monitor. The image didn't vanish. The next morning, every screen in the control hub flickered to life at 3:07 a.m., unpowered, showing the mirrored version of the ship. Crew gathered in horror as they watched hundreds of duplicates lined up in corridors, motionless, staring directly into the cameras. The footage was seized by corporate security the following day, encrypted, and loaded onto a secure hard case flown off the ship under armed guard. The captain held a quiet meeting with department heads and said only one thing: "If you value your career, you never saw Deck 7. Since that night, the Mirror Bay corridor has remained permanently sealed. No passengers are told it exists. New hires are instructed never to speak of it. Those who do claim that some nights, Deck 7 smells faintly of salt water and rust, and the mirrors hum softly, as if something is pressing against them from the other side." Ex-crew members who worked that voyage say they still wake at 3:07 a.m., certain someone is standing in the dark, watching from behind their reflection. This is Voices from the Other Side. If you're still here, like, share, and subscribe, because next week, we're releasing a declassified recording from a cruise liner that disappeared for 3 days and came back changed. Some ships reflect the ocean, others reflect you. Story 7. Silent Disembarkation. An entire tour group leaves the ship early morning through a sealed exit. Security footage shows them walking straight into the ocean. The MS Coral Serenade was known for its luxury Caribbean voyages, but among former crew members, it's remembered for one morning in March 2019, when an entire group of passengers vanished without a trace. The incident is buried deep in corporate records, sealed under maritime investigation protocols, but security officers who were on board still whisper about it. They walked off the ship, through a locked exit, straight into the ocean like they were following something we couldn't see. It started like any other cruise morning. At 5:45 a.m., the Coral Serenade was anchored just off the coast of St. Lucia. Most passengers were still asleep. Sunrise excursions didn't start until 7. Security officer Ethan Reyes was monitoring cameras in the control room when he noticed movement on Deck 3, the ship's lower promenade level. A group of 12 passengers walked single file down the hallway toward a sealed maintenance exit. They wore casual clothes, sun hats, and sandals, as if heading for an early shore excursion. Ethan frowned. That exit wasn't open to guests. It was bolted shut and alarmed. He zoomed in. The group moved in perfect silence, their faces blank, eyes fixed ahead. The woman at the front, later identified as Helen Wilcox, a 62-year-old retired teacher, seemed to be whispering something, her lips barely moving. "Who cleared Deck 3?" Ethan asked over the radio. "No one," came the reply. "That deck's closed until tender service starts." Ethan triggered the alarm override for the maintenance door. No sound, no flashing lights. The passengers reached the exit, paused briefly. Then the door swung open, even though it was supposed to be double locked. The group filed out calmly. When the camera outside the hull activated, Ethan's stomach dropped. The footage showed the group walking down the gangway into nothing. There was no dock, no platform. They stepped off the ship's edge in single file, feet sinking into the waves without a splash. One by one, they disappeared beneath the water, vanishing like stones in a pond. "Bridge, we've got a security breach on Deck 3. Ethan yelled, slamming the alarm controls. Sirens blared across the ship, startling sleeping passengers. Officers sprinted to Deck 3, but by the time they arrived, the maintenance door was closed and padlocked from the inside. When divers searched the waters later that morning, they found nothing, not a shoe, not a life jacket, not a single trace of the Wilcox tour group. The company quietly logged the incident as a tendering error and issued refunds to the families, claiming the passengers had disembarked safely for a private tour. But among the crew, the truth spread like wildfire. The group had walked into the ocean as if following an invisible guide, and no one on the Coral Serenade ever saw them again. Within hours of the disappearance, the Coral Serenade was locked down. Captain Laura Bennett ordered a full review of all surveillance footage from Deck 3. Security officers huddled in the control room, rewinding every camera feed frame by frame. At first, the footage seemed straightforward. The Wilcox group calmly approaching the sealed maintenance door in single file. But when they zoomed in, details emerged that made everyone in the room uneasy. Their movements were unnaturally synchronized. Each step was perfectly timed, like dancers in a slow-motion routine. Their arms hung stiffly at their sides, their faces blank, eyes glazed over. And Helen, the group's leader, was murmuring something under her breath, a repetitive phrase no one could decipher, though her lips moved in rhythm like a chant. "Play that audio," Ethan Reyes said, his voice tight. There was no sound, not even the hum of the ship's ventilation or the shuffle of footsteps. The hallway cameras had captured absolute silence. When the group reached the maintenance door, the feed glitched. For 3 frames, the image froze, and the scene seemed to shift colors from warm white corridor lighting to a cold, bluish tint. The door swung open without anyone touching the keypad. "Pause there," Captain Bennett said sharply. A junior tech zoomed in on the frame. For a fraction of a second, in the reflection of a porthole near the door, a dark silhouette was visible. It was taller than any passenger, with elongated arms and a head tilted unnaturally forward. Whatever it wasn't standing on the floor. It was hovering slightly above the ground, its blurred outline bent over the group as they exited. "Could be a shadow artifact," one tech muttered, but his voice shook. The exterior hull camera offered no comfort. When the group stepped into open air, they didn't flail or panic. They walked straight down, their feet disturbing the surface of the ocean like it was a thin sheet of glass. One by one, they disappeared into the waves without a ripple. And then something else. The final passenger, a teenage boy named Eric Wilcox, paused at the edge. He turned his head slightly, looking directly into the camera lens. His expression was blank until the corners of his mouth twitched upward in a faint, unnatural smile. Then he stepped off and the water swallowed him. Captain Bennett ordered the footage locked and encrypted. Only 3 copies existed, one on the ship's central server, one on a secure hard drive for corporate, and one physical tape sealed in her private cabin safe. "All external communications will say this was a tendering incident," she told the senior staff. "You will not speak to passengers or crew about what you just saw." But that night, crew working the late shift swore they heard knocking coming from the sealed maintenance door on Deck 3. Soft, rhythmic knocks, 12 in a row. The day after the disappearance, Captain Bennett ordered a discreet sweep of the Wilcox Group's cabins. Security teams moved in while most passengers were ashore on excursions, ensuring no rumors spread. Ethan Reyes led the investigation, accompanied by 2 stewards who had serviced the rooms earlier that week. At first glance, the cabins looked perfectly ordinary, luggage neatly stowed, personal items arranged on counters. But something about the atmosphere felt off. The air was ice cold, despite the climate control systems functioning normally. Ethan checked cabin 3124, where Helen Wilcox had stayed. On her vanity table sat an open journal, but every page had been torn out, leaving only the final one. On it, in neat cursive handwriting, was a single sentence repeated over and over. "We are called at dawn." The handwriting started neat at the top, but became frantic and jagged near the bottom. "Get this bagged," Ethan muttered, handing it to a junior officer. In the next cabin, belonging to Eric, the teenage boy, a steward pointed out something strange. The boy's duffel bag was still zipped shut, clothes neatly folded as if he hadn't unpacked. But when they opened the bedside drawer, they found a Polaroid photo that hadn't been logged with guest belongings. The photo showed the Coral Serenade, but not as it looked in 2019. The ship appeared rusted and weathered, lifeboats missing, windows dark. And standing on the open deck in the photograph were 12 shadowy silhouettes facing the camera. "That's impossible," the steward whispered. "This picture looks 50 years old." They moved on to the other cabins. Each room had something unsettling. In cabin 3127, the Wilcoxes' family friend Marjorie King had left her shoes neatly by the door, but the soles were wet with salt water, despite being on board for 3 days. Cabin 3126 bathroom mirror was covered in fingerprints, but none matched the guests'. Forensics would later confirm they were child-sized. Most chilling of all, cabin 3125, shared by Helen's sister, had its balcony door ajar. A steward swore she had locked it the previous night. Outside, the salt spray had left handprints on the railing, prints that faced inward, as if someone had climbed up from the sea. Captain Bennett called for a full lockdown of Deck 3, sealing off guest access entirely. But whispers spread quickly among crew. Some passengers had noticed the Wilcox group acting strangely in the days before their disappearance. A couple staying 2 doors down reported hearing soft chanting through the walls just before dawn. It wasn't English. The wife told security, shaking. It sounded old. Another guest swore she'd seen Helen standing barefoot in the hallway at 4 a.m., staring out a porthole. She was humming, the guest whispered. And I swear I saw someone's reflection behind her, a man, but no one was there. That night, security reviewed hallway footage from the group's last evening on board. At 4:12 a.m., Helen is visible pacing barefoot, whispering softly. But in one frame, reflected in the glass of the porthole, there's a second hallway, darker, corroded, with shadows moving independently of the real scene. At midnight on March 12, 2019, Captain Bennett called an emergency meeting in the Choral Serenades conference room. The blinds were drawn, security staff stood guard outside, and all attendees were required to hand over their phones. Only 5 people were in the room: Bennett, Security Chief Alan Carter, Ethan Reyes, and 2 corporate risk officers flown in from Miami. "This incident is classified level red," Bennett began, her tone flat but grim. "Officially, these passengers disembarked for a private excursion and failed to return. That's the story the families will receive. But we need to understand what actually happened before this reaches the press." Alan Carter pulled up the hallway footage on a portable drive. The room fell silent as the grainy video replayed the Wilcox group approaching the maintenance exit single file at 5:45 a.m. Their movements were robotic, their gazes locked ahead. When Helen reached for the keypad, she didn't touch it, and yet the door swung open. "Locks were triple bolted," Alan muttered. "Manual override disabled. Even if she had a master key card, it wouldn't explain this." Bennett leaned forward. "So they didn't open the door, it opened for them." "Correct," Alan confirmed, as if something was waiting on the other side. They switched to the exterior hull camera. The group stepping calmly into the waves made everyone in the room stiffen. The silence of the footage was deafening. The teenage boy, Eric, pausing to smile at the camera, sent chills down spines. "Run thermal and motion sensors," Bennett ordered. Ethan queued up the sensor logs from that morning. "Here's where it gets weird," he said. "Our motion alarms didn't trigger when they left the ship, but something else did." He zoomed in on a faint spike in the data, a heat signature the size of a small car hovering just off the hull near Deck 3. "This isn't an animal and it's not a boat. It's stationary, and it's colder than the water around it. Like a void," Alan muttered. The corporate officers exchanged a look. One of them, a stiff man named David Hunt, finally spoke. "We've seen something like this before, 2 years ago off the coast of Norway. Same circumstances, same signatures, no survivors." Bennett's eyes narrowed. "So this isn't an isolated incident?" "No," Hunt said, folding his hands. "But this is the first time we've seen it take an entire group. They made the decision to seal Deck 3 permanently from passenger access and to fabricate a mechanical failure story." But Ethan couldn't shake the sense that they were covering something much darker. That night, he returned to the security hub alone to rewatch the footage. Slowing it frame by frame, he noticed something none of them had seen in the meeting. As the group filed through the open doorway, the camera briefly caught the reflection of another corridor beyond it, one that didn't exist anywhere on the Coral Serenade's deck plans. The floor was slick, black like wet stone, and shadows moved along the walls as if watching the group pass. 2 nights after the meeting, Ethan Reyes couldn't sleep. The image of that impossible corridor beyond the door haunted him, its slick, black floor and the way shadows seemed to lean closer as the Wilcox group passed. Officially, the footage was secured, but Ethan had made his own encrypted copy. At 2:00 a.m., while most passengers slept, Ethan convinced 2 colleagues he trusted, deck engineer Liam Ford and security officer Nina Patel, to help him inspect Deck 3 in secret. They claimed they were performing a late maintenance sweep, a routine no one would question. As they approached the sealed maintenance door, the corridor grew unnaturally cold. Their radios crackled with faint static, and Nina's flashlight beam dimmed, though her batteries were new. "Doors locked down with 3 bolts," Liam whispered, crouching to inspect it. "No way it should open." Ethan pulled up his handheld tablet connecting to the lock system. The screen flickered, showing an error message, "Override in progress." "Override," Ethan muttered. "Whose?" Before he could finish, the door clicked loudly. The bolts retracted one by one with a metallic groan. All 3 officers froze as the door creaked open on its own, revealing a pitch-black space beyond. "Deck plans say this is a storage compartment," Nina said, voice trembling. "But it's not." Ethan shone his flashlight inside. The beam cut through a narrow corridor lined with dark, wet stone walls that didn't belong on a modern cruise ship. The floor glistened as if slick with seawater, and the smell of salt and rust filled the air. "This isn't the ship," Liam whispered. Then they heard it, faint, rhythmic footsteps deeper inside, like bare feet slapping stone. "Hello," Ethan called softly against his better judgment. No answer, just footsteps growing louder. Nina raised her taser, her breath quickening. "We should go." Ethan stepped closer, his flashlight catching movement. For a split second, he saw 12 figures standing at the far end of the corridor. They were soaking wet, their faces pale, eyes vacant. It was the Wilcox group, still dressed in the same clothes, water dripping from their hair. "Eric," Ethan whispered. The boy in the front smiled faintly, just like he had on the camera. Behind him, something enormous shifted in the darkness, a towering silhouette with long, thin arms curling along the walls. Suddenly, every flashlight flickered out. The sound of rushing water roared around them. Nina screamed, "Close it, close it." Liam slammed the door shut, fighting the resistance of an invisible force pressing from the other side. When the final bolt clicked into place, the corridor fell silent. All 3 officers staggered back, trembling. Ethan glanced at his watch. The entire encounter had lasted 13 minutes. But when they returned to the security hub and checked the live feed from Deck 3, they froze. On camera, the maintenance door was already wide open, and the Wilcox group was standing just inside, staring directly at the lens. The next morning, Captain Bennett summoned Ethan, Liam, and Nina to her private quarters. The atmosphere was suffocating. Curtains drawn, phones confiscated, security guards stationed at the door. A corporate investigator, the same stiff-suited David Hunt, was waiting inside. His expression was grim, but his voice was calm and deliberate. "You broke protocol," Hunt said flatly. "You opened the door." Ethan started to explain, but Hunt raised a hand. "Save it, we've seen this before." The words hit like a gut punch. "Before," Nina echoed. Hunt tapped a file on the table, stamped classified. 8 years ago, off the coast of Oslo, we lost 5 passengers. Same pattern. Cameras showed them walking calmly through a sealed hatch and stepping directly into the ocean. We sealed the deck, rewrote the logs, and moved on. He slid another file forward. Helsinki 2014. Another group, same behavior, same result. "This isn't your first door," Ethan whispered. "No," Hunt said quietly, "and it won't be the last." Captain Bennett leaned in, her voice trembling. "We saw something on the other side." Hunt's expression didn't change. "You saw a reflection of them. Once the door opens, it calls its own. The moment you entered that corridor, you were marked." "Arced?" Liam said sharply. "Watch the footage," Hunt said. Ethan swallowed hard as Hunt turned his laptop toward them. The screen showed a still frame from the security feed, the 3 of them standing at the open door, pale and rigid. But in the reflection of the glass porthole, their faces weren't theirs. Their mirrored selves stared back, smiling, eyes black and hollow. "You'll leave this ship when your contract ends," Hunt said coldly. "You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you'll never speak of Deck 3. If you refuse, you'll never work in this industry again." Bennett slammed her fist on the table. "We can't just ignore this." "We're not ignoring it," Hunt replied. "We're containing it." By nightfall, Deck 3 was completely sealed. Welders worked through the night, covering the maintenance door with a heavy steel plate. The area was reclassified as storage, and all security cameras were disconnected. But the crew knew the truth. Rumors spread quickly. Some swore they heard knocking behind the welded door at dawn, 12 slow knocks, just like the night after the Wilcox group vanished. Others claimed that when walking past the corridor, they felt a sudden urge to stop, turn, and step closer, like someone was calling their name. When the Coral Serenade docked at Miami weeks later, half the crew requested transfers. Ethan quit maritime security altogether, but sometimes, late at night, his phone buzzes with unlisted video calls. When he answers, the screen shows the sealed Deck 3 corridor. The door is open. The Wilcox group stands in the darkness, dripping water onto the stone floor, and Eric is always smiling. Cruise forums occasionally whisper about the Coral Serenade. Passengers hear footsteps pacing outside their cabins before dawn, or see reflections that move a second too late. Some say a door near Deck 3 hums softly at sunrise, as if someone or something is trying to get out. And those who have worked the ship long enough have one rule they repeat in hushed tones. If you hear knocking from behind the steel wall, don't count the knocks. Don't answer, because the door is always calling for someone, and someday it might be you. This is Voices from the Other Side. If this investigation sent chills down your spine, share and subscribe, because next week we'll share never-before-seen footage of a cruise ship that sailed back into port 3 months after it disappeared from radar.